This is the D6 generation with your hosts, Craig Gallant.
No, cut that. Keep that. Someday it's going to be worth something.
Russ Wakelin.
You put me in an ATST with frickin' Wookiees attacking me and whatnot? Now you're talking.
And Ray Greenley in the third chair.
It is I, Kazan Modat, and I smell you, coward.
With contributions from Total Fangirl
Vampires do not sparkle.
and our loyal listener.
Crazy? That's like 400 hours of gamer nonsense.
Welcome to another edition of Rapid Fire, the roundtable discussion of all things gaming, coming to the speed of a high-speed passenger jet, tearing very loudly over an inspiring landscape that might or might not contain a deep dungeon, beautifully narrated.
What?
This edition is brought to you by all of our friends at Patreon who help us keep the lights on today. Travis, Troy Kiefer, Uko Karto, Ulrich Ilg, and Victor. Tonight, our panelists are, as always, Russ Warwick's Revenge Wakelin
What?
and Ray Glam's Glory Greenley, angel voice narrator, voice actor extraordinaire, and longtime listener. Let's begin. Issue number 1. Onomatopoeia is a word that phonetically imitates, resembles, or suggests the sounds that it describes. Although in the English language the term onomatopoeia means the imitation of a sound, the compound word onomatopoeia in the Greek language means making or creating names. Question: which of the following words is not considered onomatopoeia by linguistic scholars? Cliché, blimp, sneeze, or laugh? Ratchet Russ.
I'm going to go with cliche.
Ricky Tick Ray.
I'm going to say blimp.
And that would make you both wrong, because all of them are actually considered onomatopoeia. Cliché is supposed to be the sound of forging a metal printing press plate. Blimp is supposed to be the sound that you make when you flick a thumb with your dirigible with your thumb. The other way would be painful. Sneeze is originally an Old Norse, and then got cleaned up by linguists. And then laugh originally was and then got cleaned up and lost, eventually became laugh. Which makes you all wrong, but all of those are pretty wrong also. Issue number 2. One of the best ways to open your mind is to travel to new and exotic places, meet exciting and interesting people, and experience eye-opening traditions, events, and ceremonies so different from those you enjoyed at home. And what better way to travel to new and interesting places with friends, old or new, who share your interests and hobbies? Question: since its inception in 2009, Geek Nation Tours has brought people all around the world to meet many famous industry people. Alan and Michael Perry are often seen sharing a pint with tour participants on Geek Nation Tour's Miniatures in the UK tour. Michael Perry continues to sculpt today, even after losing part of his right arm while reenacting a famous medieval battle. What battle was he reenacting at the time? Rambling Russ.
I don't know. The charge of Castle Arg.
You just made that up.
I did.
Roving Ray.
That one in Braveheart, supposed to be at a bridge, but wasn't at a bridge.
Oh, there you go.
That is incorrect. But I didn't know this one either. But it's the Battle of Cressy.
Oh,
Cressy Field. Cressy Field, if you're watching Henry V. Cressy Field, Victor. Anyway. Issue number 3. Just a few short years ago, it would have been unthinking to tell many inveterate readers that they would no longer be reading many, if any, of the novels they consumed. The advent of recorded books and the popularity of narrated novels has completely changed how millions of people around the world interact with their favorite stories, new and old. Question: central to the growing popularity of the audiobook craze is the company Audible. In what year, 3 years before they produced the first digital audio player, a further 4 years before the iPod, did Audible open their digital doors? Reluctant reader Russ.
1997.
Risible reiterator Ray.
1999.
Oh, you're so very, very close, the two of you, but no. It is 1995.
Ooh.
22 years ago, and back then, who knew how much our lives would change? Issue number 4, sound. Often given a nod and a smile by narrators, storytellers, and game masters galore. When we think about it, of course, we would need to be quiet if we were going to go sneaking around in someone else's dungeon in search of treasure and fame and whatnot. But seldom does a story or a game truly capture the nerve-wracking tension of trying to be quiet as you work. Question: what is the scientific term for the minimum sound level audible to the average human ear with no other sound present? Resonant Russ.
Psst.
Resounding Ray.
And noise floor.
That would, let's see. The absolute threshold of hearing. I would also have accepted auditory threshold, if you had said it. Unless you did say it and I didn't hear you. In which case you are still technically wrong. That's all we've got for tonight. Thanks for listening and good night.
But I used onomatopoeia.
This episode of the D6 Generation is brought to you by
Battle Foam, protecting your army so you don't have to.
And the War Store, bringing the war to your door since 1999, and that is for a decade or more.
Hello.
Hey, welcome to episode 217, Craig.
They're just getting so long.
They really are. Of the D6 Generation, I'm Russ Wakeland.
I'm Craig Gallant.
And I'm Ray Greenley.
Hey, Ray, welcome to the show.
Hello, guys.
Very exciting. So, Ray, of course, is audiobook narrator extraordinaire, and we are very excited to have you in the
long-time listener.
Yes, and
very long time.
Participants in many sort of industry things across the internets. Right, Ray? Pretty much everywhere.
That is correct. I am happy to be a part of it and very happy to be here. Thank you guys for having me on.
Oh, we're excited to have you.
How could we not?
Exactly. So we're really looking forward to talking to Ray about his how you got into the prestigious, I would say, job of audio narrator. Right? That seems like a...
Yes, so prestigious that I hide myself away from all people and shun my family for a whole day at a time so that I can record.
There you go.
There you
See,
go.
It's that sounds pretty cathartic.
Also interested in hearing the path that brought you from listener of the D6G to the imminent narrator who is narrating my book.
That's
right. Very exciting. Be looking forward to talking about it.
That's very exciting. And then later we're going to review Clank, the short title,
Clank.
but full of fun game. We'll talk more about
What's
that.
that word that means a sound? It's other words.
I don't know.
Tell you what, when I'm narrating an audiobook, Clank is not what I need. That is a big problem, especially in a house with many kids like I have.
Right, exactly. So we'll go more into that about that in a little bit. But first, we actually ran into Ray at Dunkin' Donuts, and
We did indeed.
Ray, do you remember what we talked about? What we spoke about there in Dunkin' Donuts?
Yes, we talked about donuts.
We did. Yep.
Oh, and after that, we talked about traveling and how traveling can inspire you in your gaming.
We did. And Craig, if someone wanted to hear that episode or other hours of Lost Chapters, how would they go about getting involved in that?
Well, let's see. The best and easiest way is for you to become a patron over at Patreon. And now you can go to patreon.com and then look for the D6 Generation there. Or you can go to the d6generation.com and click on the Patreon button. It'll bounce you right to our page over at Patreon. And you can check it out there. All the details are there. Basically, you're supporting the show. You're kicking in a little tip into the tip jar, and that keeps the show going and unlocks for you, if you tip $2 or more per episode, every episode of the Lost Chapter that we have ever done.
Exactly. So head on over and check that out. Now, also, we have a couple other bits of record keeping we should talk about. First of all, our Gen Con event is finally live on the Gen Con website. So we're really excited about that. It is going to be the Thursday evening at 8 o'clock. And so if you're interested in participating in that, please head on over. Now, this year, we're able to make it free again. That's the good news. So no charge.
Yay, free.
Yep. We got room for up to 150 folks, so plenty of space. Come on down, sign up. You do have to sign up to get in. That is sort of a thing Gen Con does, but there is no fee. So head on over to that. Just go to the Gen Con website, type in D6G in event search, and you will find it. And we look forward to seeing you there as well. Participate in a live recording of the show, as well as in our play-by-mob game, which is always sort of a secret, and we surprise everyone there with how it's going to work. So good times at that. So that's that. And, one other thing, we just had a contest, Craig, just wrapping up right now.
We did indeed.
Now, do you remember what the contest was?
It was creating universes and worlds and cosmos and whatnot.
Yes, in Torg Eternity, right? We had our friend Dean was on the show, and we were talking about Torg, and he offered to give away both some really awesome prizes from the big Torg Kickstarter over there, the GM kit, as well as a cargo box. And the contest was, go ahead and tweet your ideas for crazy worlds that might be found in the Torg version of Earth. And go ahead and include your hashtag on that and everything. And folks did. And Dean has picked a couple and sent us the winners. And we're going to announce them here right now. So, Craig, do you remember who the first winner is? The winner of the cargo box.
Yes, the cargo box is the big thing from the Kickstarter, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That would be, let me see what I can do here. City of Olympus.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Mid-20th century cosm run by mafia gangs, led and granted powers by human avatars of Greek gods.
There you go. I love it.
Sounds awesome.
Mafia gods. How can you go wrong? And so the winner there was Twitter handle JVV76. So JVV76, go ahead and give us a direct message in Twitter from that account to us, letting us know your address, and we will pass it on to Dean, and he will get that cargo box out to you. Now, we're also giving away a GM kit, which is also a pretty darn impressive
everything
prize.
you need to run a game.
Yes, and so, Craig, what was the winning entry for that?
The winning entry for that, Russ, was by at an improvised man. The Awakened Sea, Pirates versus Kaiju on the waves of the surface and vast caverns of air on the ocean floor.
Oh, man.
That's
awesome.
Too. How did they get the pirates down to the vast caverns of air? That's the tricky bit, I would imagine.
Steampunk submarines?
Oh, that win. Yes, I like that. Love it. So, an improvised man, also, please go ahead and send us a direct message as well, and we will get your email, your address information off to Dean, and you will get that. So, thank you very much, Dean, and all the folks over at Torg for those awesome prizes, and congratulations on your very successful Kickstarter. So, that's great news. Now, Ray's here, and Ray offered to give away stuff as well. So, Ray, what are we giving away from you today?
Well, as it has been mentioned, I am currently finishing up the audiobook version of Craig's excellent sci-fi epic book, The Legacy of Shadow, and I would love to be able to give some copies away to the listeners. So,
and I would love for you to give some copies away.
I have 5 copies that I would be happy to give out to whoever can enter and win the contest.
Excellent. So, Craig, you had the idea for this one. How do you think this should work?
Well, let's say the book Legacy of Shadows takes place in a galaxy filled with various and sundry aliens that Ray had to come up with different voices and intonations and inflections and everything for everybody. So
that was fun.
I would hope so. It was fun coming up with them. So I think it's only fair that you guys have to come up with a little something along the same lines. So you're going to tweet to us using hashtag D6G and hashtag Legacy of Shadows, and you're going to tweet it to. Are you going to tweet it to both of us?
Yes.
So tweet it to at what ours is at info
at the D6 Generation.
Oh, that makes so much more sense.
It really does. At
the D6 Generation and at Ray Greenley VO.
There you go.
Greenley, yes. Greenley.
Yes.
And hashtag D6G hashtag Legacy of Shadow. It's not going to leave you very many characters.
No, you got to get really creative. That's right.
You got to have to be very pithy.
Yes.
And you're going to come up with the name for an alien race and a very brief, quick description of the alien race.
Exactly.
And we will come up with some cool, wacky way to choose the winners. How many winners?
5.
5 winners. That is how nice and generous Ray is being.
Yes, we're going to try
5 winners for this audiobook.
Whatever I can do for the audience of the D6 Generation.
Yeah,
we love you.
We're going to try to pick these winners live at Gen Con. So at our live recording there. So your entries have to be in by 8/15. So August 15th, which will give us time to have the list ready for our Gen Con show. We'll do something fun there to pick the winners. So really excited about that. So thank you again, Ray. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So, Craig, what's the time now for?
Achievements in Gaming!
It is. And, of course, achievements brought to us by all of our fine friends over at Patreon, who definitely, all their fine contributions help us keep the lights on and do crazy things like go to Gen Con and whatnot. So thank you guys and gals for all that. So, Ray, what have you been playing lately, Ray?
Well, I've had the good fortune of getting a decent amount of gaming in here recently.
Nice.
One thing that I had that allowed me to do that was my dad came to visit me for a week, and my dad as I'll talk about later in the show, was sort of my start as a gamer, because he was a gamer even before I was born. And so every night we got to stay up and play games. And one of the games we played a lot of was my copy of The Fury of Dracula that I picked up when I finally got panicked that it was going away forever. And I've got to get a copy of this game because I love hidden movement games, and the theme just seems great. So we played that 4 times over about 3 or 4 days. Wow. And had a lot of great Dracula hunting going on.
A classic.
It is a classic. Excellent.
Yeah, the new 3rd edition is great. Love the combat and the art and pretty much everything about it. Tons of fun.
Excellent.
Another one that I picked up just recently that I had been interested in and finally bit the bullet to go and get it when I was ordering another game that we'll end up talking about later at the end of the show, is called The Blood of an Englishman. Have either of you heard of this one?
I have not.
This is a small box game from Renegade Game Studios, same company that made Clank. It's a 2-player asymmetric game, which, if you can guess based on the name, is based on the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. Oh. And so in this game, one player plays Jack and the other player plays the giant. It is, when you get down to it, fairly abstract, but they did such a good job with the theme, like the images on the cards and the way that the two sides work, that I feel like the theme still comes through pretty strong, even for what's pretty much an abstract game. In the game, you have the game is basically 50 cards, and those cards can be beanstalk cards, which are have numbers 1 through 9, and there's multiples of each one. There are treasure cards, 2 of each of the treasures from the story, the harp, the gold, and the goose that lays the golden eggs. And then 8 giant cards, which 2 of each of fee, fi, fo, and fum. And these are just dealt out in 5 columns at the start of the game. And then the Jack player can either move a card from the front of one column to the front of another column, can pull one card from the back of a column and put it on the front of a column, or can pull a card from the front or back of a column to build a beanstalk, showing him climbing the beanstalk. The trick is that he can pick any card he wants, but when he takes another card for the beanstalk, it has to be higher than the one he picked before. So he can skip numbers, but he can't go 2-1. He has to go like 1, 2, 4, 5, along like that. And then once he has 6 beanstalk cards on his beanstalk, then he's climbed to the top, and he can claim a treasure card in the same fashion. It has to be either the front or back of a column. And if he can do that 3 times, get each of the different treasures, then he wins the game. That's really cool. Giant, on the other hand, and Jack gets 3 actions on his turn, so he can do 3 things. Little quick Jack does a lot of different things. The giant only gets 1 action on his turn. And the way he wins the game is that he either needs to make it impossible for Jack to finish his beanstalks, or he has those giant cards, fee, fi, fo, fum. And if he can get all 4 of different types adjacent to each other in one column, or across the front of 4 of the 5 columns, then he wins. He's caught Jack. And, we know what happens when the giant catches Jack, right? And the giant on his turn can do one of 3 different things. He can either take 4 cards from the front of one stack and move it to the front of another stack. He can move any 2 cards from the front of one stack to another stack across the board. Or he can just destroy a beanstalk card from the game. Just pull it out and take it. And the way that, I know it's probably hard to get an idea of how it functions just from listening to it, but the way it works is you have this big tableau to start. And Jack is running around doing stuff, and the giant cards are probably spread out, and it's just like, well, how do I get these cards together to try to win? But as the game goes, more cards get taken out, and those giant cards start getting closer and closer together. And if Jack's not careful, then the giant's going to be able to trap him and just take him out. But Jack, is running and dodging, and he can move stuff around and try to keep the giant away from finishing his things. And it takes about 10-15 minutes to play, and it really is a lot to think about because it's pretty tricky. And I've been really enjoying the 4 or 5 plays I've had of it so far.
That sounds really neat. I like the mechanics a lot. It sounds really interesting. I'd definitely watch for that.
Yeah, and it's like a $15 game that if you buy it the right place online, you can get even for less than that. I think it's a great value for a nice, quick 2-player filler game.
Excellent. What else is on your list there?
Another one that I've been playing quite a bit of recently is a bit of an oldie, Innovation from good old Carl Chuddik.
Oh, yeah.
I picked it up last year. The first time I played this game years ago, a friend taught it to me. I was like, I don't get it. This is too weird. Then I played it again at the World Wargaming Championship with a bunch of people, and I was like, I'm starting to think about it, see how this works a little bit. And then a year or so later, I saw it in the store and picked it up, and I've just been loving it ever since. The thing that is neat for me is I have several young children. I have 6 kids, actually, aged 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, and 3 months. And so my older kids are getting to really where they can play a lot of games with me. And my 8-year-old saw me playing Innovation with somebody else and said he wanted to learn to play. And I'm like, oh, man, all right, well, I'll try to teach this to you. But this game is really hard to get the hang of. But he stuck with it. And he's actually legit beat me like 4 or 5 times.
Awesome.
My 8-year-old. And, I don't let my kids win, right. I'll not like crush them. Well, sometimes I'll crush them, but I won't usually crush them. But he has gotten the idea of it. He figured out some combos and he just hammered them hard, and there's just nothing I could do. And it's so awesome to be able to get this game, which you really need multiple plays to learn the cards and figure out how everything works. And I've been able to do that thanks to my son getting in on it. And at 8 years old, he's already beating me.
That's fantastic. I was always impressed with my kids and kids in general. Like they pick this stuff up much faster than you think, and at ages much younger than often recommended on the box, which is I think is really cool.
Yeah. As long as you're not going too early. I know I sort of, with my first son, sort of pushed a little hard. I think it was like 5 or 6 years old. And I'm like, here, let's play a dumbed down version of Summoner Wars. And I think it was a little too much for him. So now I'm trying to let that happen naturally. So when they say, hey, I want to learn this game, that's great, let's play it. But I don't push it on them to try to like force them to learn before they're willing or ready. And I think it's worked out a lot better.
I think that's smart. Nice.
So in the realm of other games I've been playing with my 8-year-old, I got Hero Realms earlier this year, which, if you remember Star Realms, it's the follow-up to that.
Yeah.
A very similar game system with just a few tweaks. Not at all like the Cthulhu Realms, which added a whole bunch of stuff. But I've been playing a lot of that with my 8-year-old, and he has also beaten me on that one a few times, nice. Although it took him a while to sort of get the hang of the deck building. Which I should probably talk about. Hero Realms is a competitive deck building game where you're trying to defeat the other player.
Right.
Unlike Star Realms, Hero Realms can be played with more than 2 players. So you can get a 4-player game going. And the way I like to do that is you're basically beating up on the guy on your left. And if you take out that guy, then you win. And the game's over, so you don't have people getting eliminated and needing to sit out and wait for the game to finish. Cool. But it's a pretty straightforward deck building game where you're buying cards from the center row. They will synergize with each other. If I buy the red card, then it has an ability on the bottom that triggers if I have another red card in play that turn. It has cards that will stay out on the table and have to be taken out by the other player for them to get discarded. And another neat thing that they have, which is an extra purchase, is you can get these packs that are character packs that then basically, instead of just being a generic player, you now have the fighter or the thief. And they have some special abilities, and their starting decks are different. They'll have different amounts of money, different like attack cards and stuff in the starter deck. So the starter decks themselves, and they'll even start with a different amount of health. So you got a lot of like asymmetrical play there to sort of vary things up a little bit. And I've been having a lot of fun with that one, playing with him, and played with my dad too when he was there. And my 8-year-old just beat up on my dad.
Nice.
In that game. My dad could not beat him. He was beating up on all of us with that one. I don't know what it was. It's like, I've played a lot more games than you. I should be able to beat you at this game, but it just wasn't happening. He's just too on target with it.
That's great. That's fantastic. Keeping Grandpa honest. You got to like that.
Oh yeah. Well, speaking of games with my dad, I have been playing for a couple of years now. Through the Ages with my dad on the website boardgamingonline.com.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which I got started a long time ago, but me and my dad pretty much always have a game going. And if you just keep doing a new game, it just basically puts a new number at the end to show you how many you've played. And I think we're up around 300 now.
Wow.
That's awesome.
And
and that's not even counting the games we've played with other people. I've probably played close to 400 games with Through the Ages with my dad over the years.
Wow. And that's not a really super fast game, right? I mean, there's a lot to that.
No. It's the nice thing about the Board Gaming Online interface is that it is asynchronous. Right. So, I can do a move, and then when he's ready, he brings up the website, he does his move. But we can get through, a game in 2 or 3 days.
Wow.
Or more if, we're both sort of at the computer, maybe more often than we should be, and can throw them back and forth. A game lasts about, 20-ish turns. Mm-hmm. So, it's about 20 back and forths, which we've been able to get through a few.
That's awesome. I like the dedication. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, and it is a game. And for people who don't know, Through the Ages is Lara Chavatil's Civ building game, which is basically card-based for the most part. And you're getting technologies from the center row that you use actions to pick up. And there's just so much going on. It's a engine building game where you have to balance your resources and your food and your science and your military, all in the goal of earning culture, which is what you actually use to win the game. It's another one that takes a little bit to get the hang of. I've kind of learned a little bit of how it works over the 300 plays, but there's still so much more depth to the game because I still get my rear end handed to me by other people I've played online. Wow. Even with all the time I've put into playing it, I just really enjoy that one, and I haven't gotten tired of it, even having played hundreds of games online. And one of these days, I'll actually buy a copy to reward the designer and publisher for all the time I've spent playing their game.
Great. I played that one online quite a few times, and I like it a lot. It's a really great game. It's everything you need right in one great package.
Yeah, and playing it online, you don't have to do all of that manual bookkeeping. It does all the math for you, and you just click a button and all the cards go. No shuffling.
Yep.
You do miss something without not having the face-to-face, but it's a good time.
That's sweet. I love that you're able to keep in touch with your dad like that. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So another one that I've been playing a little bit recently, and I ended up picking up this one after listening to the Ludology podcast with when Jeff and the guy whose name that I'm forgetting right now, and I'm really embarrassed because I'm about to talk about his favorite game, who made Baseball Highlights and the Mystery Rummy series. And maybe we'll look that up at some point, and I'll be embarrassed that I didn't remember your name. I'm sorry. But it's Matai, which is another Carl Chudik game, along with Innovation. This one, my wife was not a gamer at all before we got married, but I've been wearing her down over the years. And we have most Saturday nights are nights to play a game if we can manage it. And so I picked up Matai, and I thought it would be a fun one for us to try to do. And we've played that one several times together, too. And that's another one that, even more than Innovation, it's like how you play it the first couple times, and it's how do you win? How do you actually, how do the actions I'm doing move me towards actually winning the game? But what we can do when I'm playing with my wife over time is that we can actually get familiar with it and learn the cards and actually start mining some of the depth that it's hard to do with games these days when there's always something new coming out and so many games to play. I really enjoy it. And I should probably talk about what the game actually is, because I forgot to do that again. If you haven't heard of Matai, it is a card game. And the theme of it is pretty loose, but it's you're supposed to be like monks at a temple, and you're crafting works of art to sell to people coming through your temple in the gift shop. And so you spend your time using cards as your tasks, which lets you do things like get helpers or get materials or move materials to sales and all sorts of stuff that, again, this is a really confusing game. So please don't feel bad if you don't get the idea of it just from me talking about it. But when you complete these works, each of these cards is an individual work. They all have special abilities that when you complete them, you can use to sort of create combos and break the game and do all sorts of stuff to other people or just to help yourself. And so there's so much going on, and it's it's hard to get the grasp of. But once you do, there's a really a lot in there to dig into if you can get those repeated plays going.
That sounds great. That's awesome. Ray, I'm really impressed by the amount of replays you're getting into these games. That's good dedication, my friend.
Depth of your gaming is impressive.
It really is.
Yeah. Well, I do try to get
the breadth is too, but generally people don't get this much depth.
Yeah, well, that's what I really, and especially my wife is like, how are you going to play all these games? Like, I'm going to try, Yeah, I'm really going to try to get these games played. There's some on my shelf that haven't gotten the attention they deserve, but some of them, especially with my kids now that it's summer and my boys are home from school. And I guess I should mention that along with being a narrator, I'm also a stay-at-home dad. So I'm home with the kids for the rest of the day if I'm not recording. Surprisingly, there's still very little time to sit down and play a game when you've got like a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old running around. But I get a lot more opportunity to get games in with my boys than otherwise, I think, be able to if I had to go to an office every day. Oh, nice. The final game I have on my list, which I'm bringing up here just because I got to have a war game on the list, is one I played with my dad again when he was out. It was the Battle of Five Armies, based on the climactic battle of the Hobbit book.
Indeed.
And the Hobbit, like one of my earliest memories of when I was growing up, my dad was always a big Lord of the Rings fan, was watching the Hobbit cartoon, the classic Hobbit cartoon. So it was just a part of my growing up. And so this game, Battle of Five Armies, is just, I had to have it, and I had to play it with my dad. And it was sort of a learning game. This one I haven't gotten as many plays in because it is, a 2-ish hour, 2-player combat game, which can be hard to get to the table. Not my wife's sort of game. My boys aren't quite ready for it. But when my dad's here, I got to play some war games. Mm-hmm. And so we got that one in, and he took the Shadow and I took the Free People, and it's all about the Shadow trying to rush in and capture the various strongholds of the Free People, while the Free People are trying to hold them off until the Fate track can run out, which releases the different special characters. So as you go on, you get Bilbo and then Thorin, and then the Eagles come, and then and then Bjorn comes at the end of the game and just starts wrecking everybody. It's just so thematic, so great. It's a little complex as the Ares games, Lord of the Rings games can be. But I just love it. And I love the theme and everything that it brings to the table. And that's one I really wish I could get more. And if my boys are a couple more years older, I'm going to start. Hey, let's play some more war games.
Just sucking them in. I think it's great. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. That is awesome, Ray. That is quite the list, and the depth is, as Craig said,
impressive.
Is really good stuff, Ray.
Try to be prepared for the show.
You were clearly, but I don't think this is unusual for you. I'm getting the feeling that that's sort of the pile of games you blasted.
In fact, the one that you played for the show isn't even on this list.
Right.
No, because we're going to talk about Clank later in the review.
There we go. See, look, he's a consummate professional, Craig. Look, no duplication.
Did you see how he just seeded that in there? Very impressive.
Brilliant. So I'll go next, Craig, because I only have one. Unfortunately, I've been traveling a lot, and so, which was a lot of fun, and we talked about that in the last chapter, so I won't belabor it here, but that meant that, unfortunately, since the last episode, I have not had much time for gaming, but I did get in with Craig just last night, quite a large game, 1,500-point game, my first 40K, Warhammer 40,000 8th edition game with my own army, the army formerly known as the Imperial Guard, with all my classic models, like the old Rough Riders and the old Ogren. I've got several generations.
It was great. Your entire collection was on the table at 1,500 points.
Pretty much almost everything I owned, with a few exceptions, like the Calidus Assassin didn't make it, and one of my Sentinels didn't quite squeeze in. But almost everything. And it was a lot of fun. The game, Craig had a beautiful table we were on, and Craig brought his Space Wolves, and everything worked the way I remembered, both the good and the bad, and not in a negative way, but the Guard are still terrible shots, and that's okay. But the only ding is that the play length is pretty. Right now, it was bordering on a 5-hour session.
It was,
and now to be fair, the game is 40K 8th, as we talked about before on the show, is much simpler now. It's essentially the core rules are only 7 pages. However, all the magic of the game, what makes the game still fun and interesting and has all the variety, is that every unit in the game now has these data sheets in the indexes with very special rules, which are awesome, but it does mean you're looking everything up constantly. And until you really learn your army and learn your opponent's army really well, you and your opponent will be looking things up continually. And even though we had great success with a little app called Battle Scribe, and it worked great, it had all the information in it, even that, you still had to look everything up. And so I'm a little nervous about game length, and I'm looking forward to a few more plays. But I had a blast. And Craig, the real part about it that I thought was really innovative, and I think I mentioned this on the show before, that I like 8th edition, but in the core rules, there's not a lot innovative there. It's just like a really streamlined version of the original 40K. But there are some innovations in the game I'm discovering, and one of the ones I really liked was the tactical cards. So what's interesting about how the tactical objectives, thank you, yes. And the tactical objectives are in the core rulebook, and you can play without cards, but definitely get the deck of cards. And what's interesting about this is there's 6 different missions that take advantage of these tactical cards or objectives.
Six objectives and a bunch of missions.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I thought it was only 6 missions. There's a table of 6 missions.
Oh, no, sorry. You're right. There's 6 missions that use the cards.
Exactly. Correct. So when you play the mission, it tells you when to draw cards, and essentially you have a bunch of face-up cards in front of yourself, and these cards give you many objectives to do, but the objectives in the cards will change as you play. So it's not like by the end of the game own this, or by the end of the game own that. It's in this turn, see if you can kill an enemy unit, or in this turn, try to take this objective point on the table, or over the next 2 consecutive turns, do not allow your opponent to capture this objective. And it requires you to then be very dynamic and do things and respond and react. And it makes the game much, much more about than just killing other guys' units. And I think it helps remove the problem of the first player turn, a lot of other things. So I think it really adds a lot to the game. And if you are playing 8th edition and have not tried those tactical objective cards, I highly recommend them. I think they add a lot of fun to the game as well. So I really enjoyed it. I just hope we can bring the playtime in a little bit, Craig.
Yeah, I would hope.
So what about you? What have you been playing?
Well, funny you should ask. I, too, have been playing 40K. I did not go away. So I did another and hopefully my final 8th edition starter box game. This time around, I was more of a referee and coach for your brother John and our friend Joe. And Joe is a very good gamer. He's very good at pretty much anything he tries. And so he took on the challenge of the Primaris Marines after we told him what was going on. And your brother just still claims that it's his skill with the Plague Marines that creates that scenario. But Joe got crushed. So, I still think that the conclusion that we came up with in the last couple of episodes, where the starter box is really kind of bent towards the Plague, is still true. So I really wanted to play a game that had nothing to do with the starter box at all. So the Nerd Herders had an all-day 40K game-a-thon last Sunday, and I really wanted to go. At the same time, we were dropping Reese off to big Cub Scout camp for the first time, where he was sleeping over for 4 nights, and so that was very stressful, and we needed to get him, and that was like a 3-hour presentation of bringing out there and setting up their camp with them and everything. But eventually I did get to go, and I wanted to get 2 games in. I only got 1 game in, again, because of this game length issue. And that was a 2,000-point game that I played with my IG, my Hell's Reach Highlanders, all the way back from when the the Steel Legion boxed army first came out. And man, do I have with 2,000 points, I didn't come close to fielding everything I own, because that was my primary army for many, many, many years. I had 3 Lehman Russes and a Basilisk. I had 2 Stormtrooper or Scions, Tempestus. The names are all confusing to me, but I had over 100, almost 120 models on the table. And I played against our friend Matt, who is one of the hosts at 40K Radio now. I played his Raven Wing army, which meant he had about 30 models. And by the end of the game, it was talk about classic IG. I had about 15 models left when his last model died.
Wow.
So I did win, but it took a good 4.5 hours, and it was grueling. It was brutal. I lost almost everything, which is pretty much, if the Guard are going to go up against, especially an elite Space Marine force, like an all-bike Space Marine force, with 6 Terminators thrown in for good measure, you'd expect a victory is going to be costly, and that's what it was. It was a lot of fun. I'm still loving the game. And then when Russ asked if I'd play him on Tuesday, I wanted to play, but I wanted to try something different, so I brought out my Space Wolves, who were a very major army of mine for years and years and years that I built and developed after I had moved on from my IG. I didn't come close to fielding everything I had for them either, because I couldn't fit in any of my vehicles. But at 1,500 points, there were a lot of Space Wolves on that table.
There were a lot of guys. It was really
there were a lot.
Really pretty scary.
Sadly, once again, they almost all died. But that game came down to, that was the I can't remember. There's a GWE name, like Maelstrom of War or Storm of War or something for the missions that use the mission cards. And that really came to, I love that because it's such a dynamic battle when you're constantly surging back and forth trying to get different missions and score different objectives. And it really came down to that. It was what what did you have? I can't remember the final, 9 to 11 or 8 to 11.
It was close. Yeah, it ended up being 11 to 9, but that sounds farther apart than it really was, because at one point you were up by 2, and then it was like we were tied going into turn 4, and then I picked up a couple extra at the end. So it was a really, very, very close game. And what I liked too is you do crazy things, like Craig's leader was getting towards this one objective, and it was like if he captured that objective and he captured it with his leader, he gets all these points, and it was like quite a bit. It was like 4. Meanwhile, I had an objective to kill his leader. I had an objective to hold the objective he was trying to get, and there's a bonus point for killing his leader as well. So I did some crazy things, like have my Rough Riders who can flank come on from the side and charge his leader. It was a long shot, but there were too many points involved to not try. So you do these things you might not otherwise do, and it makes for some really dramatic cinematic moments. I really like that mechanic.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then I had a friend of mine who, another teacher who hears me talk about gaming all the time, and he's not really a gamer. He and his wife came over and they wanted to play games. So we introduced them to Hex first. They had a blast. That's always a classic, a good one to bring out. And then they both like computer RPGs. So they're both fantasy fans. And I had a stack of games in the pub for them to choose from. And Karen was like, not that one, and not that one, and not that. She was kind of vetoing, and I kept having to go, no, Karen, you don't get to veto. These are our guests get to choose. And they chose out of that pile. They chose Dragon and Flagon.
Ooh, how did it go with non-gamers?
Yeah, it went great with non-gamers. They had It took my friend very quickly glommed on to the basic concept of what was going on and laying down your plan ahead of time. His wife didn't really. So she had like 4 or 5 turns where she couldn't do what she was trying to do, and we kind of tried to explain to her what was going on, and then she got it and she won. So she had an awesome run of attacks at the end there, where she really just kind of put everything together and it started working for her. So that was a lot of fun, and they're going to come over in another few weeks, and we're going to play some more games.
Yeah, so that's what I think for that one. At 4 players, you're supposed to each play with 2 characters, aren't you? Did you guys do that, or is it just 4 on the table?
No, I don't think I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I would think that would be hard for new gamers.
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to do that anyway, because a 4-player game, you're having a lot of fun with just one character. Yeah, that would do a lot of weird things to like the play time, and I'm all into my fast games nowadays. So
yes,
we
fair.
didn't do that. We just played one person per.
Yeah, I was just curious because I think that is in the rules, just because more characters on the board, obviously make more possible things for crazy stuff to happen.
Right.
But yeah, because I haven't heard of anyone who's played with fewer player counts saying they actually played with multiple characters. I think that would be pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, so especially with a new person. Can you imagine trying to track the intention behind 2 different characters?
No,
3 cards ahead. Right. Oh, I shiver. Who would design such a game? But anyway, so that was me. Now, what about modeling, Russ? What did you model while you were off and away?
0, 0, zippo, nothing.
with an excellent excuse.
Yes, but how about you, Ray? Did you do anything, build anything exciting or anything?
I am not into miniature games, and I'm a terrible artist. So painting minis, while is sort of a dream of, wow, I'd like to be able to say paint my Mice and Mystics set or something like that. I just I can't. No, I'm not gonna do that. What I have done and got started on a new one specifically so I could bring it up for the show was I've made my own foam core inserts for my games. And that's
cool.
Sort of modeling, right?
Yeah,
building stuff.
Totally
Absolutely.
counts. Creativity and building real stuff. That counts.
Yeah, I kind of have gotten away from it for a while, but I started building a new one for Fury of Dracula because, with FFG games, you just got everything in the box. And I really like the game, and it's got all these tokens that you have to spread out. And if I had a nice little tray that I could just have the tokens in their spot and bring it out and set it on the table, it would make setup a lot easier. So I got started on that. Some of the ones that I've done in the past, especially the one I'm most proud of, is my Mage Knight insert, which I made. If you know Mage Knight, it's got a ton of cards and a ton of pieces and everything. And I made an insert so that I could put it and the expansions I have all in the original box. Don't have to have extra boxes around. It's just great. I love making those inserts so that I can get the games packed in there nicely just the way I want them.
Nice.
Very cool.
That's really cool. Now, do you go to like a craft store and get like just foam core and cut it to the right
pretty
size?
much. The ones I usually buy, just get at the local Walmart. They just have the sheets there. I find the black ones and I pull it out. And as long as it's not too warped, then it works pretty well. And when I was learning to do it, there's the website's called the Esoteric Order of Gamers. It's run by the guy who, if you know the what is it? Not Hidden Head. Something that he makes gaming rules summaries on different sheets that you can print out. And he also makes these foam core inserts, and he did some videos on how to do it. So I watched his videos on how to make it. And I just got started myself. He also does, on his website, Esoteric Order of Gamers, which I guess you can Google because it's not foam core plans for different games that he's put together, and he puts them up there so that you can, cut, you need a piece this long and this wide, and then you glue it together and put it together like this. And I've put together his insert for Battle Lore 2nd Edition so that I could get everything nicely in that box and don't just have the pieces in the bags underneath the side like how it comes. And that was great until I got expansions for that. Now I have troubles fitting everything in the box again, but there's just a lot of stuff for that game, so there's not much else you can do.
That's awesome.
But if anybody's interested in making the foam core inserts, then I would check out that site and watch their videos, and that's how I got started. And it's really not that hard. It just takes some patience and precision, just like any modeling, right?
Right, exactly. That sounds awesome. I'm gonna try that. I'm gonna check that out.
That is cool.
What about you, Craig?
Well, I have been busy while you've been away. You need a lot of models to play this new 40K.
You do.
And you do. And you also want to be building towards your fully fleshed out organizational charts so you can get more command points for more rerolls or other things. Russ was using them very cleverly to try to adjust and adapt his hand of mission cards in our game. And so I found a lot more elites because I didn't have really any elites for my IG army. Especially when the stormtroopers moved to troops. And so with the way that the Imperium works and the Astra Militarum works, you can take people from other groups for your elites. So my elites, to get my elites and my HQs, because you want to have a lot of HQs too, for a variety of reasons, I've painted up. These are all models that I had. That's awesome. That's the awesome thing, is that I had these like 5 or 6 or 7 years ago when we stopped playing 40K. So I have 2 different limited edition Inquisitors that I got out and I put together and I customized a little bit and I painted them up. I had 2 sprues of Bretonnian men-at-arms, and I couldn't remember why I had them until I started looking through online, trying to get inspiration for these these esoteric, strange models for these IG armies. If you want to buy them, they're like 2 per metal pack on eBay for $30 or $40 for 2. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. But, oh, hey, look, this guy used these Bretonnians. And so I built 6 Crusaders, who are the hand-to-hand combat masters of the Inquisition. They all have power swords and storm shields. So I was able to go through my bits box and build those using the Bretonnians as the core. The Inquisitorial Adepts are the sort of like the henchmen of the Inquisitor that run around with him. I used IG bits and Bretonnian bits and other weapons here or there. And I built 6 of those with a variety of weapon options. I kit bashed 3 flagellants together. These are like guys who have kind of like brain control helmets on, and their arms have been replaced by these massive flails. I had a Valkyrie. Rumor has it, Russ, you found your Valkyrie in the basement. I found my Valkyrie in the attic, and I actually built it, put it together, and used it in my big game against Matt, and found it very limiting in the way that flyers move and its weapons, because some flyers, especially Space Marine flyers, some of them do not degrade. Their firing heavy weapons don't take a minus when they're moving, which, of course, your flyers are almost always moving unless they crash or go hover mode. And so I found it very frustrating, even though I was putting out 9 shots of my regular weapons and 2 D6 shots of other weapons. I was putting out a crap ton of shots, but they were only hitting on 5. So it was very frustrating.
Welcome to the
that
IG.
Frustrated me. What?
Welcome to the
What?
IG.
Yeah,
Right.
welcome to the exactly. But usually you're used to hitting on a 4+ with the IG.
Well, that's the thing. I had the same problem with my tanks, right? If I ever move them,
it's very
if you
frustrating.
ever move them, all of a sudden they become wildly inaccurate, right? So
Exactly. You could just shooting up into the sky. And so frustrated as I was with rolling to hit, I went and they made an awesome new plastic kit for the Hellhound, and it is almost impossible to find. Even on the GW store, they've decided we have a few of these left, so we're gonna sell them for double the price. So it was very, very frustrating. But I found one on eBay for only $5 with shipping. It was only $5 more than the regular retail price. So I got it, put it together. I now have an awesome Hellhound. It looks beautiful. It's an awesome kit that makes all 3 of the different Hellhound variants.
right.
And it's not like you don't have to be tricky and kind of like not include all the bits and pieces so they fit. It literally they're plug and play. The 3 nozzles are plug and play.
Oh, nice.
So the tank, the barrel is separate, and you just plug in the nozzles for the 3 different types of cannons. I love it. And then when I played Space Wolves, I had to do a bunch of repairs on the fly because that whole army was brutalized. I think during the flood, it got moved vigorously. I was trying to salvage stuff. And then today I put together 3 of I had resin Thunderwolves. Back when Thunderwolves first came out and didn't even have models yet, I bought a bunch of resin pieces from Russia. and I started putting those together today. They went together really well, so I'm kind of looking forward to hopefully playing with those again soon. And then my big score was right at the end of us playing 40K, when I was still super excited and trying to keep everybody else excited. I built these 3 enormous terrain pieces using all of the 40K urban terrain that I had collected as an employee of GW. So that was a crap ton of building pieces. And I built these huge 3- and 4-story buildings of complete ruined buildings that take up probably, what, Russ, would you say, like 2, maybe 3 square feet?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
They're awesome.
On the table. They're big. They're not 3 square feet. They're like maybe like 1.5 to 2 square feet on the table. And then we stopped playing, and they collected dust, and I got really upset. We had a friend, Will, who was still playing all kinds of different GW games. And so I kind of gave them to him for a song. I'm really bad at selling stuff to friends. I feel guilty. So I'm just like, no. It's like $400 worth of stuff. Just take it. And didn't think much more of it after a few years. And then he went on to have some babies and had to get rid of all his stuff. And I didn't even remember his stuff anymore. But recently I was like, oh, I wonder where that stuff went. I want to try to get that back. I'd buy it at almost any price. And then at the 40K all day 40K day thing that we had, lo and behold, there were all 3 of the pieces. He had given them to another one of our friends, and they collect dust because he doesn't really play very often, and they were just collecting dust. And I was like, told him the story, and I was like, I'll buy these back. And he was like, please, you don't have to buy them back. Just take them. They're collecting dust anyway. So they're these awesome things. If you looked on our Twitter feed, you saw the 2 biggest buildings in our game with Russ, which was, Russ, by the way, the first time I ever played with those.
Or was it?
So that was awesome. Very exciting. I built those. I had them all and never got to play with them once.
They're great because they're...
So, as someone who went onto the D6 Generation Twitter and Facebook and looked at this stuff, it is amazing. Oh my God.
Thank you.
I looked, like, I saw what you guys were playing on. I'm like, how does someone make that? It just blew me away. It looked fantastic.
Super excited to play on that. And the centerpiece wasn't even on there because it was so covered in dust and damage that I needed to clean it up. And so that's why it's here in modeling, because I spent all day last night and most of today, my free time today, repainting bits and pieces that had been chipped and washing it. It's a big giant sludge pool. And so it has a water effect inside it, and it's all glossy and everything, but that was completely covered in dust to the point where you couldn't even see any of the water. So I had to clean all that up and repaint it. And it's all raring to go, and I'm super, super excited to get that onto the table almost as much as another army. So that's it for me.
All right, excellent. Well, what about other stuff? So, Ray, what about geeky books, comics, movies, TV shows? What have you been reading and watching?
I've got a few things going on.
Excellent.
So, main thing I've been watching with my wife is the Great British Baking Show. That's
I've
geeky,
watched
right?
that show. No, but it's good. I like it.
It's a kind of geeky.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe not quite D6 Generation geeky, but it is so British and so great, and we love watching it. And we ended up, they have their masterclass thing where the 2 main judges will actually make some of the stuff and show you how to make it, and it's just like, oh, we've got to make that. Oh, we've got to try to make that. We've got to make that. I'm not a baker. My wife is the baker, but it's like, okay, baby, you make that, and then I can eat it. Also, in preparation for the show, I was like, I got to watch something else, and I saw the new Castlevania that they had out on Netflix.
Oh yeah,
it was only like 4 episodes, and I was like, hey, I can crank that out by staying up way too late one of these nights. And so it is an anime style, and I've enjoyed anime in the past, but I'm not like a huge anime fan. But it was pretty good. There's a few like of the tropes I can see in there that are sort of like, oh yeah, of course we have our, reluctant hero who's all down on everything and doesn't actually want to help, but all right, I'll help. Right. And that sort of thing. But it was also, be warned, very bloody. That type of anime.
Very gory. I watched it with my daughters, and they're 14 and 13, and they were on the edge. They really liked it, actually, but it's on the edge for them. It's a very gory, very adult show, right?
Yeah, but it was the action was really cool and exciting. Yeah. The setup, I don't know if this is the actual original Castlevania setup, because I don't remember Castlevania lore. I played the game, but that doesn't mean that I really cared much about except whipping things.
It wasn't really a story-driven game. It was pretty much a side-scroller. You beat stuff up. That was pretty much it.
Yeah. Like, what's the story in the 8-bit world?
Right.
But they sort of set it up for why Dracula is invading everything and causing all these troubles, and I guess dark. That works. Yeah. I've got some plot questions and things like that. But in the end, it's all about just watching the crazy action and of course, the 4 episodes, as you might expect, are not a full the full story. It just sets itself up for whatever's coming next.
And it's already been renewed for double the episodes. It's going to be coming back, we don't know when, with 8 instead of 4, which is good. So.
And man, does Netflix ever do something wrong when it comes to their produced shows? They just seem to nail it every time.
They've had some bad. I mean, if you look carefully, they've had some not so good ones. But mostly,
I don't look that carefully. I watch the good ones and I'm impressed.
Yeah. They do. But I'm with you. I mean, most of their stuff is fantastic. They really do a good job.
So that's my watching. I don't actually get to watch that much TV because we try not to have the TV on for the kids too much. So usually it's at night. But I do, as you may have heard, enjoy audiobooks. And so a few that I would like to just mention quickly here because I'm sure we're starting to push our time, that I've listened to that might be of interest to the listeners. One is just finished listening to Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman, narrated also by Neil Gaiman. Part of the reason I wanted to listen to it because I wanted to listen to a book that was narrated by the author. I've heard that he's one of the few authors that can do that well, and so I wanted to hear how he did it, and he's great.
Good. Yeah, he's
really good. And so this is a recent release of his where he went back and he talks about this at the front of the book and, wanted to get these Norse mythology stories and, put them into a format that people can listen to and sort of get that background on. Because, these days, I never got into Norse mythology when I was a kid. I was into Greek mythology, and I've heard about, all the things from Norse mythology, like, Thor and Odin and the giants and Tony Stark and all that stuff. And, I didn't actually know the stories. So that was all based on. So I decided that I would get this and be able to listen to it and then have that foundation. So, when I'm watching Marvel, I know where Thor comes from because that's totally honors the original mythology. He has a hammer, right?
Right. Right.
But no, it was really cool, and I definitely recommend that for anybody who is into or interested in Norse mythology because the way he lays it out is like this nice, big, solid narrative. Everything's in a good order, and you just get a great feel for these characters that you don't really hear much about in our normal culture. Another book that I listened to that isn't exactly geeky, but maybe might be of interest to the geeks out there. As a geek, I'm terrible about exercise, and a book that is narrated by actually my narration coach, Sean Pratt, is called The 1 Minute Workout by Martin Gibala and Christopher Shulgin. I hope I pronounced those right. And so what this is talking about is basically talking about the science behind high-intensity interval training and what that can do for you as far as getting a good amount of exercise to, keep your body fit. Because and the thing is, the authors, they're not just talking about this stuff. They're actually talking about the scientific studies they did. Peer-reviewed. This is the science of exercise. And their conclusion of all the work they've done on it is that intensity of exercise is more important than duration. So if one of the things keeping you from exercising is the amount of time, like I detest sitting on like a bike for 40 minutes. It's like so much of my time and I can't stand it. But you can get the same benefit of that 40-minute exercise in 10 minutes by doing 3 like high intensity, max effort, 30-second intervals on your bike. So you can get, a 40-minute hour workout benefit in, 10 minutes of workout time when the actual amount of work you're doing is only about like a minute or a minute and a half of actual exercise. So if that sounds interesting, if you want to be able to get more exercise and take less time doing it, then, maybe this is the motivating factor that'll help you get out there and, get all those exercise benefits like increased energy, lost weight, and all that great stuff. And for me, it worked for about a month, and now I've been sort of falling off the wagon again. But maybe it'll work better for someone else out there. Another one I listened to that I want to mention because it was narrated by another narrator who started around the same time I did in the same method I did, that not necessarily same method, but following a similar path from me, as we'll talk about later in the show, is can I say this name or do I Stone Cold Bleepers, or I can say Stone Cold?
You can say it. Just say it. Cut loose.
It's called Stone Cold Bastards by Jake Bible.
Oh my God, I can't believe you said it.
You suckered me in on that one. By Jake Bible and narrated by, his name is Jeff Hayes. And I listened to this from him as sort of an exchange, like, hey, I'll listen to your book, you listen to mine. And it's the setup for this is really cool, which is why I was interested in it. It's basically the gates of hell have opened and demon spirits have floated out into the earth and are possessing people. And along with that, gargoyles and grotesques have awakened as defenders of humanity, and their holy places like cathedrals and stuff are basically protected areas that the humanity that was not taken over by demons had to flee into. So you got these little bastions all around the world, while the demons, who basically take over people just by making eye contact with them, that opens that person up. They call them a vessel, so that now a demon can inhabit them and take over their body, are sieging these last strongholds. And it's what it ends up being is sort of like a summer B movie, like action, bloody action movie, because there's got like the sort of cheesy one-liners and the characters with sort of a attitude and all sorts of stuff that I would expect to see in like a cheesy summer action movie, with gratuitous amounts of violence and blood, and sort of sometimes quizzical characters not swearing in situation that character probably should be swearing, but they say "gosh darn it" and like wait what? That's it was really fun to listen to, and especially if you don't mind just sort of shutting your brain off and just letting the ridiculousness of the setup and everything. It also, of course, as a lot of those movies do, leaves a lot of like the moral questions of what are going on the table, except interestingly brought up by one of the villains, talking about the moral issues involved in what the characters are doing to sort of save the world, and that just gets brushed off as distraction by the evil guys trying to throw off the good guys from their task. But the narrator, Jeff Hayes, is really good. One of the things that he did that was interesting in this book, that I haven't really heard, that is going to be hit or miss for some people, is he used actually some effects in the book. Oh, yeah. Like if multiple people, like the text says, multiple people say a certain line, he'll actually record both of them and put them over each other, so you can hear both voices saying it. Yeah. And it sounds like there's a few other things like that he'll put in there. There's people who like that sort of thing, and there's people who don't. So it's up to you. If you think that's something interesting to hear what that sounds like, I'll definitely check it out. And Jeff, one thing that he does is he has some of the best female voices that you'll ever hear from a male narrator. I don't know how he does it, but like the first time I heard it, I thought, oh, he's using some post effect on that. But no, that's not a post effect. He can just somehow capture the voice and sound of a female character like so well that it's almost, it's an uncanny. And as a male narrator who has to do female voices, I never expect to fool anybody that like it's, oh, is this a woman that's narrating? No, that's you're not going to be fooled. But when the listeners, you get a buy-in and you hear the characters and you're listening and you're hearing the character, not necessarily me, or that's the goal. Him, he could fool. He could fool me if I hadn't known better. So if nothing else, it might be worth taking a listen just for that. If anyone out there is interested in hearing that,
I've added it to my wish list. That sounds great.
So like a neat idea too.
Yeah.
No, the plot setup is really creative, and then if you just like ridiculous, like, gory, and like the situations, and there's a lot of like, this grotesque can fly because magic. And he just basically says that, like, it doesn't make any sense. It shouldn't be, but magic. It's like, it's great to see someone just not try to like make some other explanation besides magic, Yeah. For my reading, and I know I'm going long here. Interestingly, most of my reading comes in front of a microphone. I don't actually do a whole lot else beside that. So if you allow me to be very quickly self-indulgent.
Sure.
Some of the books that might interest your listeners, one that I did recently is the Kobold Guide to World Building. So if anyone out there is a fiction writer or likes to run RPG games, this is a great book, basically of essays written by masters of world building on how to make a rich, deep, interesting, and most importantly, fun world for your players or readers to experience. It's just a lot of really cool insights, everything from, how to create your own cool and interesting pantheon of gods to how to create your own world map for your world and like how it makes sense and make it interesting. Really neat stuff. Another one that I did relatively recently is from our friends at Winged Hussar Publishing, The Great Martian War Invasion. This is the first book I did with them, and it's so I really just love this book on its own, and was so excited that I got a chance to narrate it, because it's essentially what it's really based on is the All Quiet on the Martian Front minis game,
right?
Which had a sort of rocky path, as I found out in my research, of a Kickstarter that did really well and did not get fulfilled, but then has gotten picked up again and is still living and breathing. But the thing is, the book and that miniatures game, of course, is based on H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, of a follow-up invasion from the one described in that classic sci-fi book. And so the Great Martian War Invasion, essentially the connection to the miniatures game, unless you're familiar with it, is pretty transparent. I mean, you might listen to it not having knowing about the minis game and wonder, why are they worrying about building these, land battleships? I mean, that seems like a silly thing to do. Well, because those are in the minis game, and so they're, he writes in there that they're working on these things. But otherwise, you can just listen to it, and it's basically a follow-up to War of the Worlds. And it's so, I love it so much. It's basically alternate history, historical, military, science fiction, all genres that just hit me right in the right in the sweet spot. You've got these great characters, and that's one thing that the author Scott Washburn does really well, is make characters that you can really get interested in, to the point where even my wife, who listens to my stuff because she's very generous, but she's more of a mystery type reader. She likes that sort of story, or a drama. She likes classics. Even she enjoyed this book and was interested in listening to it in the sequel because of the way that Scott did the characters involved here, and I get to do all sorts of great historical characters. Like Teddy Roosevelt is the president of the United States in the story, and so I get to voice him as he's talking to his chief of staff, Leonard Wood. A lot of historical characters where I get a character and I have to figure out a voice. And so first thing I do is I Google them and see if I can, get some information. And they're all too far back for the most part to have recordings, except for someone like Roosevelt. But I can look at where they're from and try to see all right, well, how old was this person and where were they from? What would they sound like? And this is a real person who actually lived, that I get to try to voice. And it's so great. Cool. The last one, and that I've been reading a lot of recently, is one that you may have heard of called Legacy of Shadow. Yeah. Written by this guy you might have heard of named Craig Gallant.
Sounds like a jerk.
I'm not going to pass judgment. That's not my role as the narrator. You're free to have your own opinion. But this is, I'm just having so much fun reading this book. And I really, really enjoy it, Craig. It's a space opera, and I know Craig did talk about it a little bit in the one, Did You Ever Notice, a little while ago, which was great to hear. But it's, it's sort of a space opera thing where these humans get kidnapped and end up getting thrown into this floating city in space and involved in the politics there. There's so many great aliens and so much great imagery involved in this city, that with these basically spires that are old spaceships stuck into it. So there's these towers, but they're really spaceships that people end up living in because they get attached to this platform of the city. There's a lot of fun action in there, which is my favorite part. I love narrating the action sequences, and getting a lot of good excitement out of it. It's been great, and I can't wait. I'm so close to finishing the book. I think one more day and I should be of work, and I should be done.
I can't wait either.
And the book should be ready sometime in early August, or it should hit stores sometime in early August, assuming there's no unexpected delay.
You heard it here first, folks.
There you go.
That's right. That's when it should be. Yeah. There are certain things that could happen that could slow things down, but if everything goes according to plan, we should be first week of August, should be hitting the digital shelves, and we'll get to hopefully get Legacy of Shadow out to a whole new audience. And I'm really looking forward to it because it's been so much fun to do. including all those alien voices, which was the great thing that Craig did for me. Was he sent me a document that that had pictures that he had found that he thought represented different aliens. And I don't know if you'll be able to hear this when you're doing it. Hopefully you can when you're listening to the book. But basically, took the way that the alien's face looked, and I sort of tried to make my face mimic that shape. Like some of them had like a very upturned lip, or some of them had just exposed teeth. And I was able to use that physicality while I was reading the lines from that race to give each race their own sort of unique sound, even when I had to do different voices within the same race. And it was I hope it comes across well. I feel pretty good about having done it.
That's cool. Nice detail. I love it.
And that's it for me.
Nice.
Have I used up all the time, or do we still have time for Craig?
We have a couple left for Craig here. Go ahead, Craig. What have you been doing?
Oh, Russ, did you go?
No, mine's short. I'll do mine real quick. So I finished Small Favors, the 10th Harry Dresden book, and I'm moving right into the next one because the universe is just getting even better. And also, I watched Castlevania. We already talked about that. And also, I finally caught Spider-Man. I got to see the new Spider-Man movie. And my kids.
What do you mean, finally? It just came out like 5 days ago.
I know. It took me 2 to see it. But my daughters saw it with me. My wife saw it. My niece and nephew and brother and sister-in-law saw it. And we all really, really liked it. Probably our favorite Spider-Man movie. So really enjoyed it.
I would concur.
Yeah, really good. What about you, Craig?
I will go very quickly as well. I'm still listening to The Dark Tower. I just finished Wizard and Glass. I really enjoyed it. Now I'm shifting gears for Wolves of the Kala, which many people, including Russ, tell me is one of the best parts of the whole thing. But right now, I'm wishing we were back in the more sort of standard fantasy of Wizard and Glass. But I'm sure Wolves of the Kala will pull itself up. And then watching TV, the sci-fi summer shows have started. So I have watched the first few episodes of Dark Matter, which I think is still a really cool story that's developing with some really cool characters. The writing has gotten much better than that first episode, but I would still say that Killjoy's writing-wise is probably still more enjoyable. Watching Game of Thrones, getting ready for the new season that starts in 3 days. Finally went and saw Wonder Woman. Really enjoyed it. Can't wait to talk to Russ at some point about his thoughts on it, because I think we diverge a little bit, but I'm not sure where. And also saw Spider-Man and really enjoyed it. And it's those Marvel guys. I don't know.
They're all over it, man.
I don't know. They're all over it. And that's me.
Excellent.
Is that you?
That is an epic achievement, gentlemen. Quite massive.
Epic. It was epic.
It was.
In a world where board gaming was king, in a time when Kickstarter ruled the web, when every day brought more and more games, now, more than ever, 2 men and a revolving third chair and a girl, a total fangirl, brought a shining light into the darkness so that all mankind would know what to buy. They are the D6 generation.
And now it's time to talk about one of our best and long-standing supporters, Battle Foam.
Oh yeah, baby. If you need a case to transport your army, or foam to pack your guys in, or all of the above, Battle Foam is your place to go. I mean, my favorite cases, I have so many cases from Battle Foam, so much great foam from them, and it is the first place I go whenever I get into a new miniature game, and Lord knows I get into a lot of them. I immediately go over to the Battle Foam store and find all the hotness there, whether it's I need a small light bag, or if I want a heavy-duty bag that I can run over with a truck and be sure nothing gets squished. All the options there at Battle Foam for me. And Craig, I really like the Army Tray, the Custom Tray Creator app is just fantastic.
The Custom Tray Creator is as much fun as the Army Builder that goes along with building your armies, because you could just design all kinds of cool ways that you can pack stuff onto a Battle Foam tray. To just about any shape you can imagine, almost any game you can imagine, and not just miniatures games. They have really taken and embraced board games and board game portability as well. And it's really, I mean, it's your one-stop shop for getting any game from point A to point B safely.
Exactly right. So check it all out at battlefoam.com.
And now, in an attempt to bring a small amount of dignity and decorum to this otherwise base form of entertainment, and I use the term loosely, I am proud to present...
Oh, get on with it. It's time for App of the Ep. Seriously, Wakeland, I used to have my own segment, and now I'm relegating to announcing this pap. Hey, you're lucky we still use you. Hey, welcome to another App of the Ep. This time around, I got a couple, but I'm just going to stick with one this time. I got a couple really good ones, but I decided to go with a fast, fun, easy one to grab and play. It is one of those free-to-play apps. However, over time, you're going to be tempted to buy more stuff, but just play it. It's called Dice Hunter, and anybody who's a fan of, Quarriors or those kinds of games will instantly recognize that this is definitely one of those collect dice games. The premise here is that you are... I'm not really sure what you are, actually. I guess you're creating a band of monsters that sort of work for you in battle with enemy monsters, essentially. And so when you start out, you have 6 dice you're going to roll. And as you start the game, from the top of the screen down, bad guy monsters start coming in. And each bad guy monster has different kind of powers and different behaviors that will attempt to damage and attack you. And you're going to roll your dice and then spend them to either damage monsters or block their attacks. So if you roll a lot of shields, it'll give you some blocks. If you roll a lot of swords, you'll do a lot of damage. But the fun part of the game comes as you level up, you replace your basic dice, they're basically rats, with really cool other forms of heroes and monster dice. So you might get a wizard, or you might get a witch, or you might get a dragon yourself, or whatever. You get these different creatures. And then not only does this give you a cool die to roll, which changes color and looks really neat, kind of a la, collecting cool dice in Quarriors and those kinds of games. But also each of these dice have special abilities, and sometimes you roll a lightning bolt, which does nothing but powers up your abilities, and you can then spend the abilities in a dice. So one of the abilities might be to attack a monster in the 3rd row, or one might be a firewall shield, which gives you better defense and also damages all the monsters in the front row. Things like that. Really cool. You'll definitely find good combinations. My favorite is the witch. And when you get her, you can actually turn enemy monsters into frogs to reduce their effectiveness against you. So really a lot of fun. Very simple game. Very, very addictive. And, I got 5 or 6 good, 5 or 6, 2 or 3 or 4 good hours out of it for free before I got far enough along where I could clearly tell the game was trying to get me to spend money. You can still go without it, but you'll definitely get to that point where it'll make you feel like you should. But even without spending a dime, you get a lot of good fun out of it. And if you only spend $5 or $6, which is not too expensive, you can have a lot more fun with it. So that game, of course, is Dice Hunter on iOS. Thank you for listening to another scintillating edition of App of the Ep. A segment in which, hey, less of that, more just getting on with the show. Seriously, Wakeland, you are like school in summer. No class.
Hey, welcome back. And you've already heard bits and pieces of the history between Ray and the show and myself. And so we've got him on, and you've heard, of course, esteemed voice actor extraordinaire. What's that guy's name?
The other guy.
Eric Summer.
Oh, Summer. That's it. Yeah. Anyway, you've heard Eric a lot. Now we figured we'd talk to Ray because we get emails all the time from you guys asking, like, how did you get started, or how do other people get started in the industry? And Ray has a very interesting and what I would probably consider a more dedicated path to doing audiobooks than perhaps mine for writing, for instance. I just sort of fell into it. So we thought we'd get a the horse's eye view. I'm going to mix my metaphors
Is that
there.
a thing? What is a horse's
it's not
eye
a
view,
thing.
Craig?
That's called it is a thing. It's called a mixed metaphor.
Okay, just making sure.
On starting on how you got started in the audiobook industry and where you come from, but I think Russ has a question for you first.
Yeah, first, Ray, every time we have a first third share on the show, we have to ask this question. Are you now, or have you ever been, a gamer?
Russ and Craig, I have been and always shall be a gamer.
I like the dedication. That is dedication, sir. So what got you
and
into gaming?
I can't believe I haven't heard somebody else pull the Spock on that question.
Right. I like it.
But yeah, basically, I have always been a gamer. My dad, even before I was born, was an SPI war gamer, collecting the old hex and counter, paper map, and lots of little chits moving around, as well as an early adopter of computer technology. So certainly around the time I was born, we had an Apple II Plus in the house, and my dad, enjoyed games, and some of my early memories are watching video games being played on that, even watching my dad and brother play the Zork and other text adventures, which when you can't read isn't nearly as exciting, but we still did that. So it's sort of been from the very beginning for me. I've always had a gaming-capable computer in my house as I grew up. So all the early games like Carmen Sandiego and a lot of other little games that I don't even remember the names of, I grew up playing. And then as I got older, I moved into a neighborhood where we lived across the street from three boys that were basically the same age as me and my brother, and they all played games. So we would, play the old standards like Monopoly and stuff like that from time to time. But we also managed to get our hands on some more interesting ones, like remember Battle Masters?
Oh yeah, great call.
Oh yes,
yeah,
the giant Mad and the cannon and the ogre and
many people's first introduction to Games Workshop.
Yeah, well, it certainly was mine, and loved that, as well as we would even, especially one of the friends that we had that lived across the street. Matt was his name, and he and my brother would make their own games, and so we'd take like a risk set, and they would come up with like new rules for it, and it would be like a Battle of Britain, and we'd have like all the little, instead of just individual armies, they'd be individual airplanes, and I don't remember the rules for how all this worked, but it was a ton of fun back then. We would do like free-form RPGs, where it's basically purely storytelling. One person's just sort of leading it. And it was all ridiculous because we were like 8-10 years old. And so it was just completely, I'm sure, mind-numbing and what 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds just come up with when they're just making stuff up. But we were always doing stuff like that, making up games and playing the games. And so that was my foundation of growing up, was just pretty much games all the time. We had access to like Atari and all the Atari games, Nintendo, and then eventually Super Nintendo. We're very fortunate in that way as kids that my parents and my uncle, who was very generous, managed to get these systems for us. So we played all of the original console games, and then as I got older, playing all the original video games, I started with Castle Wolfenstein, and I don't know if you guys remember this or not. Maybe not you, Craig. Maybe you, Russ. But there was a original Castle Wolfenstein for the older computer systems, which is like a sort of isometric game.
Yeah, it was the Apple II, and it was like sort of a top, and the gun.
Yeah,
the guy was fixed, and the gun would just spin, right, and you'd shoot.
Yeah, and you'd have to throw grenades and stuff.
Yeah.
And so I experienced that first. So when I played the first 3D first-person shooter, Castle Wolfenstein. I had the rules of that original one in my head, and we didn't realize that you could use your gun to shoot like the big armored guys, because in the original you had to kill them with a grenade.
Right.
And so instead of shooting them, I'd always try to run up and stab them with the knife because I didn't have any grenades. I didn't know you can't shoot these guys. And that was really hard until we figured out that you could just use your gun on those guys too. And so that was later in high school. And then in college, I got introduced to like Euro games. And I got Settlers of Catan, which at the first time I was like, wow, this is weird, because I'd never experienced anything like that before. But we also had a board game group there. We played a game called Shattered States. I don't know if you ever heard of that one. where it's like breaks up the United States, and they're each different sections, and you're basically fighting over the United States. And the one that I spent a lot of time too in college was I got involved in a World War II Naval's Miniatures game, where the professor, who sort of was the live-in professor at the dorm that I was in at the time, had this rule set that he got from a friend of his that was modified from something else. I don't even know. And he wouldn't share the rules with us because, like, the actual rule book, because, you know, he was borrowing it from a friend. He wasn't allowed to release it. But we'd end up with, you know, he did a Mediterranean campaign with the British versus the Italians in a modified history where the Italians actually had enough supplies to field their navy. So make it a little more interesting. But we'd have a campaign with us on different teams, and we had an admiral in charge, and we were supposed to run different supply missions, and then there were task force commanders that would guide their task force. When they came close enough, then the professor would print out all the stat sheets for the different ships that were involved, and we'd go and we'd set up the combat in the dorm room, and we just clear all the furniture out to the sides of the floor. So we have the whole floor out. We have little cotton balls for laying out smoke, and our tape measures and our protractors. And we'd spend like the entire night playing this naval miniatures game, rolling dice based on expected hits and based on range and the type of weapons you're using, and the secondary guns. This ship will fire at those destroyers. My primary guns will try to hit the enemy battleship, and of course I miss, and then I get my conning tower hit, and now that damage means that I can't hit anything ever again until the ship gets back for repairs. Sorry, I got off on a little tangent there.
No, it's cool. I wonder if that was the Harpoon rule set, because I did play a bit of Harpoon too, and it sounds very similar. World War II, all the naval rules. That was very in-depth rule set, right? So you could play it for hours and hours before you resolved a battle.
Yeah, it definitely could be. I mean, it was you'd log out your moves, and then everybody would move at the same time, and you could even log out your torpedo launches, and you'd have to note where your ship was, and then the angle off of the bow of your ship that the torpedoes were firing, and the speed that you were firing them at, because if they went faster, they didn't go as far. And then you would sort of just keep track of it over turn, and like, oh, is there a ship in that general area? All right, let's see. There was torpedo launches from here, and it went this far in this turn. So yes, you have a 20% chance of getting a torpedo hit. After like 6 turns of careful planning and maneuvering.
Right, exactly. Hurry up and wait. But that's great. Well, that is some serious gamer cred. Now, what stuck? So it sounds like you played just about every kind of game, as well as, you know, RPGs, board games, video games. What are you still playing today? What stuck with you all this time? Well,
now I am pretty heavily focused on the board games. That's been my jam for the past 10 years or so. I was doing Xbox Live for a good while, but then after I had kids, it got harder, because it's hard to play on Xbox Live and you're playing with other video games and the baby starts crying.
Yes,
it's like I gotta go get the kid back down, because my wife is sleeping and wants to stay that way, and it's kind of selfish for me to say, hey, why don't you wake up and put the baby to sleep so I can play games?
Right.
So I did eventually move away from the Xbox Live, even though I played a ton of Halo and all those games back then. I even, in the community that I was a part of, started a Strategy Wednesday group so that we could play strategy games like Civilization Revolution or the Xbox Live versions of Catan and stuff like that. And it has been all about the board games, to the point where you may remember playing in the diplomacy game that I ran.
I do remember that. That was great.
4 years ago now.
Yeah, it was a while ago, but it was fun.
I remember when he played in it.
Yeah, it was the first. It was a special, very special, because Russ, it was the first time you called me Ryan on the air, and it was a very unique and touching moment. But that was a lot of fun. That was actually my first foray, sort of into the actual industry side of the board game thing. I had a contact with Donald Dennis of the Onboard Games podcast, because I managed to get onto their podcast when they were looking for someone to be on, and I managed to put forth an interesting topic, so they thought. And then through them, that's how I got the podcaster diplomacy game started, and then met Stephen Bonacore and Jeff Engelstein and a whole bunch of great people that have given me a little bit of a access here into the board gaming industry. And that's basically where I've been collecting board games. I still do a little bit of video game playing, do some Heroes of the Storm mostly against the AI because I'm afraid of real human players. But aside from that, it's all board gaming these days.
Nice. Now, what's your current favorite board game? Like, what's your go? If you could pick one off your shelf right now and play it right now, what would it be?
Oh, that's hard. There is Clank, which I just picked up because I needed to play it in order to talk about it later.
Yes.
And that's pretty fun and interesting, and I can't wait to discuss that one more. Another one I got recently that I managed to get a fair number of plays in was The Fury of Dracula.
Oh, is the new edition that came out?
Yes, the third edition. Picked it up before it's all gone, and have gotten some plays of that. I got to say, my all-time favorite game, and if I could play any one game, I'd probably still pick that one, is War of the Ring. Not the original SPI War of the Ring, which I do have. I haven't actually got to play that one because that's an old, SPI, you better have a weekend game.
Right.
But the new, War of the Ring second edition that I bought the upgrade kit for because I did have the original first edition. I just love it. I grew up with Lord of the Rings, and that is just so the perfect encapsulation. And that would be probably it has been my favorite game, and probably would still be if we could pick any one. That's the one I'd want to play.
Nice, excellent. So now you've been doing a lot of audio work, right?
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about that because we were excited, and Craig told me hey, Ray's doing my audiobook. And we're like, oh man, that's awesome. How did you get in? I'm really curious about this because I think a lot of times when we have guests on the show, and as Craig mentioned earlier, people ask us, they love to hear how people got into these things because some of these jobs are really cool. And like, well, that sounds like a neat job. How the heck do you get there? How did you, how did the whole audio opportunity happen for you? How did you get that opportunity started?
Yeah, well, it was it's neat because it really is a lot more accessible today than it was even like 10 years ago, because the cost of equipment has come down to the point where you can buy good sounding stuff, and then if you get a setup in your home, you can record at home. You don't have to be beholden to going to a studio. The initial genesis for my intro into audio was probably like back in college, and I was going to college for a computer science degree, which is the degree I got, and I got to the end. I had transferred schools after my first year, and somewhere in there some credits got lost, and so I was coming up to graduation, and it's like, you're like 5 credits short somehow. Okay, well, I need to take some classes. I'd always had sort of an interest in acting, so I decided, you know what, I'll just do the first summer session to get the credits I need. I'm going to take this intro to acting course, and it was a really great course. I enjoyed it a lot, and a couple times during the class, the professor just casually said offhand, you could make money with your voice. It's like, I never really thought about that. Didn't really say it to anybody else. It didn't seem like a thing that you just, threw out there very often. And so then I graduated with my computer science degree, went on to start working with .NET, and kind of just that got put in the back burner for years and years and years. Always thinking, we need to do acting, but how do you get started in that, right? How do you even do that? Then in this area that we're living in now, the Harleysville area north of Philadelphia, got a flyer from the local theater that had audition dates listed on it. I was like, I didn't know you could just go to theaters and audition for shows. Right. I mean, at the time, it's just like, would you just go do that? And no, it turns out that, you got these volunteer theaters and you pretty much just go and audition. I went and auditioned for a show called The Foreigner. Maybe, I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
Oh, I'm a huge fan.
And I got cast as Reverend David Lee.
Oh, slimy.
Let that be a good first lesson for you, Charlie. God helps those who help themselves. I had a ton of fun with that, and it was terrifying because it really was my first actual acting experience. You'll appreciate this, Craig. I had to have the director in the inside of my script show a diagram. This is downstage, and this is upstage. This is stage left, and this is stage right. Good
to get the basics down.
Yeah. But it was it was my opening into acting, and I've done a show or two at that theater every year since then. That was pushing on 10 years ago. That's
Nice.
terrifying that it's been that long.
Yeah,
But-
time slips away.
Oh, God, yeah. But
World moves on, right, Russ?
It does. It does.
certainly has been. But so then I was in acting, right? And that was in my head. And I was like, you know what? There's this thing about make money with my voice, and I like this acting. And how cool would it be to be able to make money doing this acting thing, which, I love doing it at the volunteer theater. That's a great theater. I really enjoy everything. That's the only theater I do stuff at because I just like it so much, and I can't do a ton of stuff because I have a big family. So any show that I do, like my wife does with me, as I say, that was a great dinner. You have fun putting all the kids to sleep while I go to the theater to play. And I'll get back when all of that's done. Sound great? Great. My wife is amazing. But what happened was that I thought this would be a cool thing to do, but how do you get into it, right? My first opening was I took a sort of a late night course at the high school, like a class sort of thing, just like a 2-hour thing where someone talked about, hey, voice acting. And it was in some ways a sort of a method for them to recruit people into their online education program. But it's still, that being said, I got the call afterwards. So, hey, would you like to take our class for, $3,000-$4,000? Like, that'd be cool, but I don't have $3,000-$4,000 to spend on the class. But it still, it opened up the door to me of like, this is how voiceover stuff works. And this wasn't audiobook focused at all. This was like commercial voiceover stuff. And it started like saying, hey, you know what? You can make a home studio. You can do this stuff from home. So a few years after that, I heard from someone else at my theater first about another local company that does training for VO that I was able to go and do. And I think that's a really important part for people who are looking to get into doing voiceover, whether it's commercial voiceover, e-learning, narration, get training. It's not just picking up and reading stuff. There's a lot of technique that goes along with the art that you really need to know if you're going to be successful. And I mean, even beyond just the acting part, there's the technical part. You want to have a home studio, you need to learn how to have a home studio, mic technique, using editing software, mastering techniques, engineering, all that stuff. You don't have to know it because you can outsource it. But if you're like me, who didn't have money to just pay an engineer to come and help me with all this stuff, you need to learn that. And there's a lot to learn. So if someone out there is thinking about, hey, I want to maybe get started in audiobook production, look into some kind of voiceover training. The class that I took from a company here called VoiceBox in Philadelphia, the guy who runs it's named Rob Holt, is fantastic. And if anyone's in the Philadelphia area and wants to get into this, I would highly recommend checking them out for the training because they do a fantastic job. And on top of that, you're making industry connections in the local area. And Rob is just incredibly helpful in all things. But that's where you got to start. I mean, you could try to self-teach, but you're going to make so many mistakes. You're going to spend so much time banging your head and not making progress, and you won't know why because you haven't got the foundation. I mean, what art can you go into without knowing any of the foundational basics and be successful? I mean, painters take classes. Authors, I mean, Craig, I mean, you can't just sit down and say, I want to write a book. You've got to learn about grammar. You've got to learn about...
Yes, you'd be surprised at how many people don't think that's important.
Okay, all right. I'm going to phrase that. You should learn about grammar. You should.
What are some of the, give us a couple examples of, mistakes that beginners might make.
Well, the easiest way to go there is to talk about the mistakes that I made.
Oh.
How
selfless. Very nice.
Yes. After... well, not getting training is probably going to be the number one, and I didn't make that mistake. Just going in there and throwing something out there and you don't even know how bad it is because you don't have that frame of reference, right? But when I wanted to get started in audiobooks, so there's the the way that I did that is, I'll talk about it in a minute, this website called Audiobook Creation Exchange, which is acx.com. But when you do that, you're recording the audiobook and doing all of the post-production yourself. Your job is to give finished audio to the producer for them to listen, and then all Audible has to do is throw it up for sale, which takes distressingly long for just uploading files and creating a web page. But anyway, so there's a lot of engineering stuff, like how to actually use your recording software well, and then how to make your audio sound right, because you have to get to certain audio levels. Like you have to make it sure it's loud enough. You have to make sure that there's not too much background noise, that the peaks aren't too high. There's a lot of technical stuff that you got to know, and there's tools that you use to achieve that. Things like compressors and limiters and equalization, perhaps even expanders. And then there's denoisers, noise reduction, or declickers, click reduction. All these are tools that you're going to need to know how to use. And I just sort of went in, and because I wanted to, I didn't really have a lot of extra money to spend. I didn't know where to go, what to do. I tried to teach all that stuff myself. And it took so much time. I spent so much time just brute forcing, trying to wait, how do I get this to get to these, fit the specs that I need to submit? And I did get there. I didn't use the best techniques probably. Although, if you listen to my first book, I'm still proud of that work. And I don't think it's not unlistenable or anything. It's got a pretty good rating for the people who have listened to it. But there's a lot of stuff that I probably didn't do right. Like I should not have, used a limiter as my only way of boosting the levels for the for the sound to get it loud enough, because that's not really what you're supposed to do. I probably had my gain too low on my interface here, my preamp, because I just didn't know any better. There's so much stuff to learn, and learning it the right way from someone else or finding the right resources is really key to being successful much more quickly and not spending, probably 60, 80 hours on a 6-hour book.
Right. That's great. And so, that's really fascinating. I think it's great to know, because there is a lot of, technical stuff to all this, and a lot of great tools to use. And what is, do you have a recommendation? Because you're saying people should definitely take some training. What's a fair amount? How much should someone think about spending? I mean, is there something versus learning yourself, which is going to take a lot more time and investment in time, and you're going to make a lot more mistakes, and your early work might not be as strong as you'd like to have that. There's that first impression you want to make, and you want it to be great. Do you have a feeling? Is it you mentioned
right.
earlier, 4,000 felt out of your reach? What's the right number for people to? What should they be looking at, and they're not getting scammed, but it's the right thing? Do you have a sense of that?
Well, it is a little tough because there's so many different ways to learn out there. What I can say is I feel like the place that I did my initial training with is a very good value, probably too good value, but don't tell him that, or he'll raise his prices. I spent probably about, for the 2 classes that I took, which, one was like an 8-week, once-a-week class. The other one was a 3-week, once-a-week class. I probably spent about $800 for those 2 classes. I mean, when it comes down to it, you do have to invest, but for a do-at-home, business, the investment level is really relatively low on doing audiobook narration or VO. But the trouble is getting the work, but we can talk about that later too. And then I recorded a demo, a commercial demo and a narration demo with that company, and that was another $600 or $700, which I think is also because they, I went in, had their studio time, and then they totally produced the whole thing for me. And you can hear the product of that on my website, and I'm still pretty proud of that. But to be honest, they haven't done as much for me, but that is partly my fault because I've been so busy with audiobooks, I haven't really been trying to push other avenues for VO. Right. So my training was, $1,500. including having these finished demos that I could then take and actually start trying to get work with. That's going to probably vary vastly depending on where you are and the companies that you are at. You might be near a city that has a VO training company that you can go to, like I did, which was really valuable, not only for the course material, it was for making those networking connections.
Right. And
then also working with a professional engineer using lots of different microphones in their studio, and then they can say, hey, you sound good on that mic. Because the equipment side of one of the common sort of newbie VO questions is, what mic should I get? And the answer is always, we don't know, because different mics sound better for different people, and there's no way that we can just tell you what mic sounds good for you. I was able to go into a studio where I got to use like 4 or 5 different microphones, and they said, you sound good on this one, you should try that. And that's what I eventually did. And fortunately for me, that is a relatively inexpensive mic at around $400 to $500.
nice.
And so then you're also going to need other equipment to get in there. You're going to need a preamp, which you can get for $100 to $200. Again, a relatively low investment. You're going to need a computer to record on, which you may already have. I did get a dedicated laptop because there's just no way for me to bring my desktop computer up here. Perhaps some other ancillary stuff like a desk. You need a space in your house. Hopefully you live in a kind of quiet area, or you don't mind staying up late when everybody else is asleep. If you live near an airport and you always have room-shattering airplanes going over your head, it might be hard to record VO at home.
Right. So how did you go from? Well, that sounds awesome, and it sounds like you got that figured out, and you got the demos made, and you had pretty good confidence now that you knew what you were doing. How did you get that first gig? Like, how did you break out and kind of find those opportunities? And what was it? Was it VO? Was it narration? How did that whole start?
Yeah, well, as I was going through the class, it was always the question in my head, well, how do you actually get the jobs, right? And when you hear about like the rates that you can get for a 30-second commercial, you're like, wow, that sounds great. It's at the time it was like about $350 to record a 30-second commercial. And they say you go in, it's a half hour in the studio recording this 30 seconds and you're done. But the thing is that you spend so much time getting that one job that you're not earning $700 an hour. Right. So, and then getting the work, it was always going to be the hard part. And that's where, I sort of struggled with the commercial stuff. The way that you normally do that is you find out about auditions for commercials and stuff, and you go and you audition. And living near Philadelphia, there is stuff in Philly, and the teachers that I had for the course were professional voice actors who that's what they did. And that wasn't really possible for me. I live out in the suburbs. I have kids. I can't just run down into Philly to do an audition and come back because it would take the whole day. It just wasn't realistic for me. There are websites you can go to for voiceover to do all that from home. But among this, I guess maybe it's just the circles that I'm with. I mean, a lot of people use them. They're called pay-to-play sites because you don't really have much of a chance unless you sign up for their, hundreds of dollars a year service to be able to actually get your stuff really seen. And even then, you're competing against so many people that a lot of the result is you could spend months auditioning time after time a day, and you never hear anything back because the competition for those jobs is so fierce. Right. Where I got into audiobooks, and that first audiobook job is there's a site called acx.com that I mentioned earlier, which is actually run by Audible, which again owned by Amazon. And it's free to go on and sign up as a producer. And it's also free for a rights holder, could be like an indie author, to go in and put their book there. They put their book up for audition. A producer goes in, can see the audition, download the audition script, record it, and submit the audition. And then the author gets to pick from their auditions and offer a contract. And ACX handles the whole contract, including whether it's just a pay-for-production contract where the producer gets a one-time fee and they're done, or if it's a royalty share contract where the producer and the rights holder are splitting the royalties from the sales of the book. And then the ACX and Audible handles all the payment out to all the various parties for that.
Wow.
And so what it does is that just opens the whole thing up, because any author who has their book can go and put it up there, for better or for worse. And anyone who wants to record an audiobook can go and audition for it, for better or for worse. And that's how I got into it. I learned about ACX from a friend of mine. I went on there and I started looking at the books that are available for audition. I picked several to audition for. After about the 6th or 8th one, I got my first contract. Nice. It was for a book called Nebulous Jet Black Book 1 by the author T.S. Littlefield, who it was his first book that he ever wrote. It's a young adult science fiction story about aliens and a kid who finds a sort of a technological glove from his grandfather that was left for him, and ends up fighting against this evil organization. And I think it was a decent book, especially for the guy's first effort. I really enjoyed recording it, and there's a big learning experience too, your first book. But that was how it started. I went on to ACX. I sent out auditions. There's a ton of books out there that people put up for audition. Not all of them are probably worthy of being made into audiobooks. But the fact is that there's a lot of authors out there who want their books recorded. And so the key is that the sales potential of some of those books is kind of low, to be honest.
Right.
But what that means is that the professionals, the people who are doing this for a living, they're not going to look at those books.
Right.
Because, the guy that I made the audiobook for, Tim Littlefield, he wasn't going to put up, a few $1,000s to have his book made, which is what the professionals will end up charging you is called by per finished hour. Is basically, so if it's a 10-hour audiobook, then you get 10 times the per finished hour rate, right? The professionals, you're not even going to get their attention for less than $300 per finished hour.
Wow.
And if they're really good ones, you're gonna pay more than that. So your indie author is not going to be probably able or willing to put up that kind of money, so they put their book up for royalty share. At which point, you record the book and then you share royalties of the sales. And the better producers, they're not going to look at a book that has basically no history of sales or low sales potential, because they're trying to feed their families and pay their bills, right? They can't be taking on a book that's not going to sell.
Right.
What that means is that there's a whole bunch of books out there that, they have low potential, but it is still potential that you can have access to, because you're not competing against the Scott Bricks and the Eric Summers of the world, right? So there's this opportunity, and this is how you get in, right? This is how you got to get that first book, and do a good job with it, and then the next book comes. And so I got my first book, and then towards the end of that process, I started auditioning again. I got my second book. It ended up being a series, and so I was able to do the next one there. And I got another book, and then you keep on putting out material. And it's, as opposed to like sending out auditions for like a commercial job, even if you get one, like you never even hear about it. I've made something that I can point to people and say, hey, look what I did on Audible. And I'm getting, awesome. Some money from sales.
Well, I think it's fantastic, because I'm here on Audible right now, and I'm looking at your first book there, Nebulous Jet Black. And there it is, and it's 4 out of 5 stars by over 194 ratings. That's pretty impressive.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I did have a little bit of serendipity on that one, in that about 8 months after it was released, it got put into an Audible promotion, the Hidden Gems promotion, and it got a lot of sales out of that promotion, and that's where a lot of those ratings came from. But yeah, for my first book and for his first book, we got a pretty good thing going, I think.
Now, is it hard?
And that's what gets the ball rolling.
So you said there's this ACX site. That's how you can try to establish a relationship between an author and as a voiceover person to kind of, or voice narrator to kind of say, "Hey, I'll come in and do your book for you." Was it easy for him to get it on Audible? Is that part of the deal, or how does it? Is there then another vetting process that happens that Audible kind of looks at the book and decides if they want to put it on there? Nope. I mean, how much rigor is there?
No, it's from the author side. I mean, again, ACX is run by Audible. owned by Amazon. They want content, right?
So they don't care. It's like the App Store.
That's what they're interested in.
Yeah, okay,
right.
yeah.
So, I mean, the one thing that some of the old guard of the narrators world sort of, grumble a bit about what ACX has done to the sort of overall quality of audiobook narration, because, anybody can sign up to be a producer on ACX and submit an audition and get a book.
Right.
Whether they really know what they're doing or not, or whether they're dedicated to producing quality content or not. So you could get books out there that really are not well done. And it is unfortunate. But
won't that self-curate? I mean, people will... It's like podcasts, right? Anybody and their cousin can make a podcast. Lord knows we did. But
we did it. Anybody can do it.
If you can stumble upon to a successful formula, you will rise. People will find you. And if you're not so good, then people will ignore you, right? I mean, so wouldn't those books just be?
Well, there's some luck involved too.
There is, but
a little bit.
Wouldn't those books be rated as a 1-star on Amazon and eventually fall to the bottom of the pile, and the gems would rise to the top as a high rating, right?
And then what it's really doing is this ACX site, it's opening up the opportunity for narrators, because in the old days, if you wanted to be an audiobook narrator, you had to already been like a well-established voice actor, and you kind of had to know somebody at one of the publishing houses who said, hey, why don't you come in and be an record an audiobook for us, and then they'd fly you to their studio. And you would record for about 8 hours a day for a whole week, and then you'd have your book done in their studio with their editor and producer listening, and that's how they did it. But me, I couldn't. There's no way I could get into that. Whether I have the talent to do it or not, like the opportunity just didn't exist.
Right.
Now with ACX, the opportunity is open. If you have the talent and are willing to take the time and be dedicated in learning how to do it and do it right, then you can be an audiobook narrator. You get that first job. It may not pay a whole lot. And there's always, in the arts world, the concern about, working for free or for exposure, because, you can't buy anything with exposure, right?
Right.
But I feel like this is a little bit different, because you're doing the royalty share project, and you may have a low expectation for how it's doing. For how it's going to do in the end, but there's always a chance, right, that it's going to pick up, and if it does, then you'll make some money on it. Like I got lucky with that with Nebulous and that sale that it went on, and I actually made a not unreasonable amount of money on that book thanks to it being a part of that sale, and it became a part of that sale because I think we did a fairly good job with the book, right. And so you're not working for free when you're royalty share. It's more like you're like a co-investor in a business, right? Business opportunity. And, sometimes that's not about, you want to take the best shots you can, but the more shots you take, the more chance you'll have of getting a hit, right?
That's very cool.
So it just the opportunity. That's what it's about. That now I can go in and I can actually do this and build a resume and become a narrator because of the opening that ACX has made.
I think it's fantastic, and I love the democratization of this sort of stuff. I think it's just really cool. So I know we're going a little long here, but I'd love to ask you, like, now that you've done quite a few books, and you're doing this pretty regularly now, do you find that let's bring it back to the whole geek connection now? I noticed a lot of your books are sci-fi or fantasy or sort of in the geeky genre. Do you find that the actual story and the content of the book is important to your enjoyment and therefore engagement in the art form, and you do a better job if you're really passionate about the story you're reading? Or are you kind of disconnected from what you're doing and it doesn't really matter what the content is? You know what I mean? Like, does it need to be a book you would generally enjoy reading to be able to do a good job, do you think?
I think, well, it certainly helps, having that connection to the material. I don't think it's absolutely necessary, because it's sort of a funny thing happens when I start working on a book. I have to get so into it that I have to connect to the book. And so I suppose I can say, yes, it is important, but that just is a part of the process. I read the book carefully the first time, and then I'm going through and I'm sort of analyzing every sentence, every word, not consciously, but I have to be able to turn every sentence into like a vocalization. I have to get into every character. I get to be every character in the book, which is always fun too. Right. But I have to think about every character. And so that connection just comes. And so I have done a lot of sci-fi, and that is sort of just how it's worked out. And I don't mind because I love sci-fi. I wouldn't mind doing fantasy. That hasn't really happened as much. But, like, would I do a romance? Like, I wouldn't mind doing a romance, except for the fact that I haven't really read or listened to a lot of romance. So I'd kind of be hesitant just from like, well, I don't know how comfortable I am with how romance works, right? I don't know if I would be able to really hit all the right notes for a romance listener until I've educated myself on how romance actually works as a genre. Right. So as far as like the connection to the work, it helps, but that comes from the examination. But it's like, how well do I know? Like, I know sci-fi. I've read a ton of sci-fi. I've listened to a ton of sci-fi. And so I can just go in and I know the tropes, I know the beats, and I can just do it. If I want to do other stuff, I need to do my homework and I need to research it so that I can come into it and be able to do the same thing with that other genre.
That's awesome. Well, that makes a lot of sense. That's great. Well, Ray, thank you so much for giving us the insights into this. I think it's fascinating. I love the tip.
Very exciting.
That's really cool.
And if any of the listeners out there, like if there's a topic I didn't hit or what you want to know, just post in the guild or on the Facebook or even on a Patreon, and I'll be happy to answer as many questions as I can. Awesome.
Well, great. Thanks so much, Ray. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about, of course, Clank. Don't let the dragon eat you, Ray, right?
He's done that already twice.
There you go.
This is Total Fangirl. Regular Jane most days, total fangirl when the moment strikes. Han shot first. Starbuck is a guy. And Lestat, now there's a vampire. Hey everyone, this is Nicole, your Total Fangirl. You can follow me on Twitter at Nicole Wakelin and check out my blog, TotalFangirl.com. Our shout out is to all of our wonderful supporters over at Patreon. Head to patreon.com/the D6 Generation and you too can support the show. I apologize, I sound like a bit of a frog. I've had a case of laryngitis, so the fact that I have a voice at all is pretty impressive, although it's a little squeaky. So sorry about that, guys. But the show must go on. So some exciting news just came out as I was about to record, so I decided I would talk about that. So fans of Doctor Who, we finally have our 13th Doctor. So Peter Capaldi is stepping down from his role as the Doctor after the Christmas special, I guess during the Christmas special. That'll be it for him. And we have a new Doctor, and the new Doctor is Jodie Whittaker, which is cool. And the big news is, yeah, that's a woman. We're finally going to have a female Doctor, which is kind of exciting, kind of interesting. And the coolest thing, or I guess, I don't know, most disconcerting thing has been watching people on Twitter talking about it, because when stuff happens in the fanverse, Twitter blows up with it. And it's blown up in both a good way and a bad way. Some people are just wonderfully excited to have a new Doctor and curious to see where it goes. And the fact that she's a woman is sort of just incidental to things. Like, oh, cool, we have a new Doctor. It's neat. It'll be interesting to see what they do with it. That's cool. Then there are some that are excited simply because it is a woman. There are even some folks who are saying, I was kind of out of the show. I wasn't enjoying the writing. I wasn't enjoying the direction this last season or two. And I'd sort of stepped back. But now that they've cast a woman as the Doctor, well, heck, I have to watch that. That will draw me back into the show, and I've got to see it. And then, of course, there's the set that makes everybody cringe that says, I will not watch Doctor Who anymore. How dare they cast a woman? This is ridiculous. This is awful. I don't want a woman in the role. Women are terrible. Women are horrible. Blah, blah, blah. That last set, of course, is going to happen no matter what, that someone's just going to be horrible and hate women and not want women in the role. But there's another angle that some of those voices, if you look through all that, have been taking, and I'm curious about this one. They don't like the fact that there's a woman, not because they're anti-woman, not because they feel like, no, a woman can't pull off this role. It's just not right. Women don't belong in the role. It's not something chauvinist like that, but it's more that they're looking at the history of the character itself, and they're like, we've had a lot of Doctors over the years. all those doctors have been men. And it's not so much that they're mad that a woman is taking the role, but this doctor has never been a woman before. The doctor said, how does that work? Why suddenly after all this time? And how suddenly after all this time? And how does that work? And it's not so much this anger about the fact that it's a woman just because it's a woman, but almost a disappointment or anxiousness about how is that going to work for the role. That I can understand. Like, how is that going to change things up? How is that going to work? How is that going to affect the role of the doctor? And how is that going to play into sort of the history of the doctor is fine. Now suddenly he's this female character, and how is that going to work out? So I am way behind on Doctor Who, and I will probably catch up on it over the summer, and I'm sure Russ will too. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they do, because out of curiosity, like, how are they going to make this work? How are they going to explain things? How's it all going to go down? So I'm excited to see how it happens, and I'm anxious for it. And I do appreciate the sort of fan skepticism, both the excitement and the nerves. Excitement that they've cast a woman and that there's a new doctor and that she's coming to TV, and finally we're going to see a completely new doctor. And also a little bit of nervousness, like, how's it going to work having women in a role that has been a man's role this entire time? Not that she can't pull it off, but just how does a female doctor fit into the universe? So I'm curious to know what you guys think. Are you excited about this? Are you nervous about this? Or are you really, truly one of the people that's angry and thinks it's going to just mess everything up terribly? So send me an email and let me know. nwakeland@gmail.com. Tell me your thoughts on the latest Doctor, and if you're excited that we finally have a woman in the role, or are you guys just a little bit nervous?
You're listening to the Dice Tower Network at Dicetowernetwork.com. More fun than Merchant of Venus. Wait, what? Who writes these?
Hey, welcome back. And now I've been playing this game for a little while now. I blame Tom Vassell for this because I was at a convention, and Tom said, hey, this game Clank, you should really check it out. And it was there. And the guy had only one copy left, or so he claimed, right? So I purchased it, played with Tom. It was fantastic. Brought it home. Family's played it like quite a few times now. I played it with some friends. I'm really enjoying it, and so I thought it'd be kind of fun to dig in here. And Ray mentioned that he was looking forward to playing some Clank. So where you've played it, have you played it a couple times now, Ray?
I have gotten 4 plays in.
Nice, very good.
Since I picked it up last week.
And of course, wow, 4 in 1 week. See, Ray, you are a machine at this game playing thing. I'm really quite impressed.
I actually enjoy it, so it's really a pleasure.
Well, that's good. I think that would be sort of a prerequisite. And then Craig, you have not played Clank, but you'll be our everyman.
I have tried several times and failed miserably.
You get distracted. It's not that you started and didn't like it; it's we haven't got the game to the table.
No, exactly.
Right. So, quick overview here. Clank is a you can actually play it solo, but it's a 1 to 4 player game. It is by
you do need to download an app in order to do that.
You do, that's right. Yep.
Which does not work on the Amazon Kindle and makes me sad because that's my tablet.
That is sad, but it's generally a 2 to 4 player game. It is by a company called Renegade Game Studios. The suggested time is about 60 minutes. And Ray, have you found it to be staying in the 1 hour time period pretty well?
No, Russ. No, I have not. Most of my games have been 4 players. I played 4 players 3 times and 2 players once. The 2-player game might have been around there. The 4 players, admittedly, with mostly new players, although the 1 game was a second time with the same set of 4, so that was not a new game. They all went over 60 minutes, some of them closer to 2 hours. So we might be able to get it down to 60 minutes eventually, but that was not my general experience.
Yeah, ours too. We've been seeing about 90 minutes or so for our plays. And the MSRP on this thing, the suggested retail price is $60, and we'll talk about what comes in the box and if that's a good deal or not in a minute. But first, I think, Craig, we need a dramatic reading. And I know we have a professional narrator here, but Craig, since you have not played the game, perhaps you could do the dramatic reading.
This will be my contribution.
Yes, your contribution.
Ray, you just relax and rest those vocal cords of yours.
You do this all the time. You don't want to do this again. So, Craig, can you please read the sort of the back of the box summary here of Clank?
Sneak into an angry dragon's mountain lair to steal precious artifacts. Delve deeper to find more valuable loot. Acquire cards for your deck and watch your thievish abilities grow. Be quick, but be quiet. One false step, and clank! Each careless sound draws the attention of the dragon, and each artifact stolen increases its rage. You can only enjoy your plunder if you make it out of the depths alive.
Nice
That was
dragon breath
flame at
weapon.
the end.
Yeah, I got that.
I love it.
That was well done, sir. Well done.
Thank you.
So it is. That's the goal here. It is not a co-op, though. It might sound like we're all working together to fight the dragon or something, but no, we're all independent adventurers
Acquisition
/heroes.
specialists.
Exactly, thieves, if you will. We're going in there. We're going to do our own thing. We're going to try to get out alive, and we're going to try to get out with the most victory points. Right. More about that in a bit. But first, what's in the box? So Ray, I feel like you can do sound effects. What does it sound like when you open the box for Clank? What do you think?
All right.
Sounds like?
Let's do this.
That was pretty. We have competing dragon roars here, Craig.
There was so many things in there, though.
There was a lot.
There's dragon wars, burning braziers. There's a little whiff of smoke at the end.
I
it was
heard that.
very
Yeah, it was
nuanced.
Yeah, it was like the audio
Layered
equivalent of a
and nuanced.
multimedia production. It was quite good.
We're only professional level for the D6 generation.
Thank you. So in the box, first of all, you get a really lovely double-sided game board because there are basically two different sorts of dragon's layers you can delve there, right? The art's great on that. You get a lot of game cards, 182, all I think all featuring some really nice artwork. You get a nice big cloth dragon bag in air quotes, and this is a key mechanic of the game. More about that in a second. But it's basically a cloth. Think of a large dice bag. You're going to get 4 of the thief meeples, the main character meeples, in the 4 primary colors. You're going to get a lot of these wooden cubes. So there's a lot of wood in this game. You're going to get meeples. You're going to get a big giant dragon meeple, which is cool, and a bunch of cubes, all in the different player colors. Each player's got 30 cubes, so you're thinking about a lot of cubes. Then you got some cubes for the dragon as well in the neutral black color. You get a lot of gold piece tokens for the game. They're all made out of cardboard. These are just tokens. Actually, I'm not going to list all the tokens. There's tons of tokens in this game as well, and you get a nice full-color rulebook also. So, Ray, when you first opened this thing and started looking at all the components in the box, is $60 a fair price for this kind of game?
I think it's a pretty good price. I mean, you do get quite a lot. There's a lot of cards. Like you said, the art is really fun. There's a lot of your standard cubes, but the dragon meeple is like nice and chunky and big. The whole bunch of tokens to use, and then the cloth bag, and it's got a nice sort of insert to store everything in.
Yep.
So I think it's a pretty good value, and the fun of the game, fortunately, also backs it up as being worth the $60 that they're asking for it.
Exactly. So I agree. I think $60 is pretty fair. Especially for all the wooden cubes in there. Usually games with that many wooden cubes, you're looking at over 70. So I think it's a pretty good deal. So let's talk about setting it up here, Craig, and let me know if you're following along here.
Yes.
So first of all, each player is going to get their own pile of stuff, and most of that pile is going to be these 30 wooden cubes in your color. So blue, red, I think it's yellow and green. I'm trying to remember the colors. And you're also going to get your little wooden adventurer pawn or the thief pawn there. And the core mechanics of this game, now, Craig, don't let this deter you. I know you're not a big fan of deck building games, but they do pitch this as a deck building game, and it is in fact a deck building game. And that is, each player is going to start with their own little deck of cards, and so you're going to get there's instructions in the book which how you break them down, but basically 6 burgle cards, 2 stumble cards, 1 side steps card, 1 scramble card. More about how your deck works in a little bit.
And don't forget to read the flavor text at the bottom of those, because there's some really fun stuff. The stumble one says, if you wanted to get out, you wouldn't have made so much noise.
Exactly. And the art's great on each card. As Ray mentioned, there's some nice little flavor text on each card and very clear iconography as well as clear things to do with that. And more about that in a moment. So each player gets their little starting deck. They're going to get their cubes. You're going to flop down the game board on whichever side you want to play on. There are clear instructions to start on one particular side for the easy mode in the game when you're first time around. I say easy mode. It's not really, it's not co-op. It's just the less complex side. Then you're going to also put down a bunch of tokens on the board. So on the game board sort of looks like is broken down into three main sections. There's the top section, which looks like the top of a castle. And then it's sort of a side view. If you took a side cutaway view of a castle and the dungeon underneath is what you're looking at here with a bunch of little sort of room shapes that you're going to have lines connecting all these rooms that are where you're moving through. So the fluff of this is your little character is going to go deeper and deeper below the castle. And each of these rooms have iconography to indicate the kind of room it is and then what kind of tokens might be there, if any. And so you're going to want to go ahead and put these tokens in the right spots. The primary tokens you want to watch out for are these artifact tokens, because the main goal of the game is to get into the dungeon, get an artifact, and get out. You can't leave before you get an artifact, and you can't carry more than one artifact except for special situations. So you're basically trying to pick one out and get out of there. So you're going to put those in the spots that match the icons on the board. There's also a bunch of these question mark tokens that are double-sided. One side's a question mark, another side's a little bit of loot you can gather. You're going to shuffle those up, and you're going to put the larger question marks on the iconography. The large ones go, the smaller ones and the small ones. So basically you're seeding the dungeon here, right? With some things that are known and some things that are unknown. And of course, there's a couple things that are also known, like the monkey idols that go down to the dungeon as well. And there's a little market down there deep in the dungeon. The obligatory adventure game where somewhere, some reason, there's a little merchant down in the middle of a dungeon, a monster-filled dungeon, and he's down there selling things. And you put the tokens down there for things you can buy there also. So that's basically setting up the board. Also, you've got that really cool-looking giant dragon meeple. And along the edge of the board is this dragon rage track. And one of the primary mechanics of the game is you're trying to avoid getting attacked and angering this giant dragon. And that meeple's going to start in a spot on that track based on the player count. And as the game progresses, his meeple's going to move along the track, which is basically representing the dragon getting angrier and angrier. And each dragon attack is going to get more and more severe based on where it is on the rage track. Making sense so far, Craig?
Mm-hmm. So far, so good.
Do you feel like you have an understanding what the board sort of looks like?
I do.
Excellent. Now, another big mechanic of the game is this dragon bag, which is this giant sort of fuzzy dice bag situation. And you're going to take these 24 black dragon cubes and throw them into this bag. Now, as the game progresses and you make more noise and cause clanking sounds, each player, remember, has those 30 cubes in front of them, and those cubes in their color are going to start going into this bag. And when the dragon attacks, you're going to be drawing cubes out of this bag. And if your color comes out of the bag, that does a wound to your adventurer and goes into your wound track. And if your track fills up, you're dead. These black cubes in the bag are basically duds. So you want those in the bag because as you go, you want to be drawing black cubes out so no one's getting hurt. Or you certainly don't want your own color. But those black cubes very rarely go back into the bag. So over time, the black cubes come out and you're left with only player cubes in the bag, and the dragon gets more and more painful as you play. Right? Making sense?
Yep.
Lastly, we're going to be setting up essentially the market of cards. So like any deck building game, there's a little sideboard of the table here where you're going to want to have your card set up. And there's some of those cards are fixed set up. So there's a goblin, and some decks of other cards that are like the mercenary, an explorer card, and some secret tome cards. Those little mini decks are all set up so people can buy those. And then you're going to shuffle this really massive, what they call the dungeon deck, which is really all the cards you're going to eventually buy and put into your own deck. You're going to shuffle those up, draw 6 of those, and lay them face out, and you've created what they call the dungeon row, which essentially that, plus those other cards I mentioned earlier, create the market. Right, Ray?
Yes, just don't confuse that market with the market that's on the board of the dungeon where you buy in-game things like keys.
Yes.
That's a separate thing. You do not have to go to that market to buy cards, and you cannot buy the stuff from the in-game market by going to the dungeon cards.
Well, good clarification. Exactly right. One little note when you're setting that up, and it's an easy rule to miss, is that when you're laying these cards out, you'll notice some cards have a little sort of like flaming version of the dragon meeple icon in the corner. That represents a dragon rage card. And if any, when you're first setting up your little row of cards, if any of those have that icon, they should be shuffled back into the deck and a new card should be drawn so that all your initial cards do not have that icon on there. And lastly, players, remember, they got their pile of cubes. They also got their cool little thief pawn. You're going to put your pawn up at the top of the game board outside the dungeon, sort of like on top of the castle there. And we're going to determine the player order, which is random, although I think the official rule is the sneakiest player gets to go first. Ray, do you consider yourself a sneaky player? Would you be a first player?
No, I do not. I apparently have very strong tells whenever I'm playing a game that I'm supposed to be sneaky or deceptive in. So no, I don't go first on that count.
There you go. So there's a couple neat mechanics here. So one, we're going to, and I normally don't play by those sort of fun but crazy little rules. We just randomly determine player one. Then it's going to play
pretty easy to just shake up all the meeples and let somebody draw one out.
Exactly. So let's say Ray was first. Ray would put his meeple first on the sort of the entrance area to the dungeon, and then clockwise around the table, everybody put their other pawns behind them. And a sort of interesting little game balance. The first player must immediately put 3 of his or her colored cubes right into the Clank area of the board. So there's this big section of the board on the right called the Clank area, and it's sort of a staging area that the cubes go to before they go into the bag. So basically, you don't want to get your cubes over there, but in the beginning, player one's got to put 3 cubes in the Clank area, player two's got to put 2 cubes in there, and the third and fourth players, if there are any, are only putting 1 cube in the Clank area. And again, it's an advantage to put less cubes in, because the more cubes in the bag, that means the more likely you're going to take damage when dragons attack. So you definitely
I thought the fourth player didn't put a cube in. Did I have that rule wrong?
I think it's 3 and 4. I just checked it today.
Okay.
So it's both.
All right. I will make that adjustment in the future, and that fourth player will no longer be getting an unfair advantage.
That's right. Well, you can double check the book, but it's right there. And I like that mechanic. Exactly. The last thing you do is each player, remember I mentioned you have a starting deck of cards that is the same for everyone at the beginning of the game. You're going to shuffle that little deck up. You're going to draw yourself 5 cards, and now we're ready to start. Making sense, Craig?
Yep.
It's really not very complicated. Everybody gets the stuff of their color. You're going to throw the tokens on the board where they go. You're going to get your starting decks. You're going to shuffle them, and you're pretty much ready to start. Now, when we describe these sorts of games, the very first thing we should do is talk about the goal of the game. Now, Ray, what are we trying to do here when we start playing this? What should we tell the players you're trying to get done?
The goal of the game is to infiltrate the dungeon, get as much loot as you can, including one of the valuable artifacts, and not get eaten by the dragon in the process. And if possible, get all the way out of the dungeon and come home with the most loot and the most glory and be the awesomest acquisition specialist of the game.
Exactly right. So what that essentially means is that, and this is an interesting mechanic, so all of the artifacts, which are very clear face-up tokens seated throughout the dungeon, are there. They're a special shaped little hexagon, so you know you got an artifact. And there's a very clear number on them that indicates the number of victory points you get for being in possession of that artifact. Now, interestingly, once you pick up an artifact, you may not drop it for any reason. And in most cases, you may not have more than one artifact. Also, you may not attempt to leave the dungeon until you have at least one artifact, because no acquisition specialist worth the salt will leave without the coveted artifact. What's interesting is the higher point artifacts are deeper in the dungeon. So you can try to be the guy that zips in, gets the easiest to get to artifact, worth the least number of points, let's say 7, and then get out of the dungeon again. Or you can be the guy or gal who goes really deep and tries to get like a 20-point artifact and get all the way out. But that's going to be a harder run because it's a longer walk to get there and it's a harder walk to get back out. And let's say you pick up the 7-point artifact and then later see it's possible for you, based on what other players are doing, to go for that 20-point guy. Well, now you can't because you're stuck with a 7-point artifact unless you go to the Merchant's Guild and go buy, yourself a backpack, which gives you that ability. But now you got to go get there, get enough gold, go do that, makes it more complicated. So there's a lot of decisions and trade-off analysis you're going to be making as you play this game based on what you're doing, but also based on what your opponents are doing, and trying to go for. Does that all make sense, Craig?
Choose wisely.
Yes. All right. So that's the plan, and your turn is pretty simple. So during your turn, you're essentially going to take your hand of cards, which is 5. And remember, we already shuffled our deck, our each individual decks. We drew out 5 cards. And essentially during your turn, you can go ahead and put them face up in front of you because it doesn't matter if the table knows what you've got. So you put them face up, and you're basically going to spend, that little hand of cards is going to give you a bunch of resources. And you're going to spend those resources to do different things. And you can do any and all of the things you can afford to do based on the resources your hand of cards gives you, right? So, for example, your hand of cards will give you some points that you can go spend. They're called skill points that you can go spend to acquire new cards from that dungeon row I talked about earlier, right? So we'd set up that little area of cards. I don't want to call it the market because Ray's got a good point. There's another market in the middle of the board, but that area of cards, you can add new cards to your deck. You can spend skill points there. There's also iconography on the cards that might be in your hand that have little symbols of boots. And the little symbol of boots can be spent to move your meeple deeper into the dungeon, right? And there are also going to be icons for swords, and those swords icons allow you to slay monsters that are either in the market of cards there, the dungeon row, because the dungeon row is usually considered as full of cards that you can buy, but sometimes there are cards that are just monsters, and by slaying that monster, by spending swords to slay that monster, you'll get cool stuff, typically gold, maybe it's other things. So you want to do that, but also as you're moving around on the game board, there are icons that mean that if you go through this tunnel, you'll be attacked by a little monster. It'll do 1 wound unless you have a sword to spend. So you're using those swords to either slay monsters or avoid taking damage. And lastly, there's 2 more things. You might also collect gold with your cards, which can be spent later in the dungeon, or you might generate Clank. So you might have a couple cards in front of you. One card might be Sneak, which gives you movement. Another card might be Slip, which causes a Clank. And another card might be I can't remember, like Go Shopping, and you get some skill points. Is that making sense, Ray? Did I miss anything there?
Yeah, no, that sounds pretty good.
And is that making sense to you, Craig?
It is.
So it's actually really simple. You lay all this down, and you spend as much of your resource points as you can. But the big part of the game here is trying to figure out which cards you want to buy and add to your deck for later. There are really, as I mentioned before, there are really kind of 3 cards you might see that you can affect that are in that sort of dungeon row area. The first one is a card you're going to add to your deck, and it goes into your discard pile. And like any deck building game, at the end of your turn, you will attempt to draw back your 5 cards. If you don't have enough, you reshuffle them. The other card you might see would be what they call a device card. And these cards, when you buy the card, instead of putting it into your deck, it just immediately has an effect. It just immediately does something. Might heal you. It might give you a free move or something, and those things you can grab. And then, of course, the third thing I mentioned earlier, there might be monsters there you want to slay. One thing also interesting is there's always a goblin monster sitting there face up that never really dies. So he's like basically points in a box.
Or just lots of goblins. Goblins crawling all over the place. There's always one on hand to beat up for a gold.
Exactly. And really, the most complicated thing is the movement, and it's not that complicated at all. When you want to spend your boot tokens, or your boot icons on your cards, you simply move your guy from room to room, and one boot generally lets you move down one tunnel to the next room, and the rooms on the board are all connected with these little thin tunnels, but there are sometimes icons on those tunnels, and if there's a little foot icon, it means it costs you extra movement points to go through there. Sometimes there'll be little lock icons, which means you have to have bought the key from one of the merchants deep in the dungeon to get through there, or you might see little monster head icons, which means that you will take a wound if you move through that tunnel, unless you have sword icons you can spend to basically deflect that little monster's attack, right? And a couple of things worth noting. Some of the rooms in the dungeon are these sort of crystal caves, and if you enter a crystal cave, they're really cold, and you have to stop moving there even if you have more movement points you could spend. So pretty simple. Making sense so far, Craig? Anything?
You have to stop because it's cold?
The crystal caves, I don't know if it's because it's cold or you get lost, but basically...
I thought they were so vast that you have to spend extra time making your way through them.
That sounds right. Let's go with that. But in any case, you basically stop.
Cold seemed odd.
Well, cold, crystal, ice, whatever. It's all there. One other thing worth noting is that many of these rooms, as I mentioned earlier, have tokens in them. Some of them are question marks. You don't know what you're going to get. Some of them might be the artifacts, which you really, really want. Some of them might be some smaller things that are valuable but not artifacts. These things, when you enter a room like that, you may choose to take one of those tokens. Typically, the question mark tokens are generally good, so you take those, but sometimes they are not good. Like you might get a dragon egg, which I think is worth a victory point, but the downside is it also makes the dragon angry because you stole him, and it moves him up on his rage track. And one thing worth noting is whenever someone gets a dragon egg, or whenever someone takes an artifact, the dragon gets angrier and he moves up one in his rage track. And that's bad. More about that when we get into dragon tax in a second. So that's pretty much your whole turn. And Ray, anything else you want to add to that whole turn sequence, what you do?
No, I guess one thing that I would want to make clear is that you do have to play out all of your cards, yes, whether you want to or not, because some of those starting cards are nothing but bad. But you got to lay them out there and suffer the consequences anywhe.
Yeah, you got to generate Clank. So some cards will say create Clank. When you see that, you got to take one of your cubes and put it in the Clank area, which means when the dragon does attack, you got to own this. So you do have to put all your cards out. And some of the cards too, when you buy and add them to your deck, have good things but also bad things. Like there's one that's this giant robot this giant sort of steampunk monkey robot. That
MonkeyBot 3000.
I love him. He's awesome. He does a lot of attacks, but he also generates like 3 clanks. So it's this guy that's like, you're going to do really great damage to monsters. And this is where the game gets interesting because there are a lot of synergies in the cards. And some of the cards represents companions that are traveling with you. Some of the cards represent technology like the crazy MonkeyBot. Some of the cards represent spells. They represent tools. They represent weapons or anything. And it's interesting because the synergies really work. And if you build a deck of mostly companions, it'll make you be really good at doing certain things, but not as good as other things. And so you eventually get really good at maybe moving quickly through the dungeon, but maybe you're not as good as fighting monsters. Maybe you're better at fighting monsters, but you're generating more noise. And so you do find yourself building sort of a particular kind of party. And I found it to be particularly sort of fluffy. And in my mind, in our games, I generally lean towards the companion. So I picture myself as this sort of acquisition specialist who also hangs with a lot of folks and has a lot of mercenaries and sidekicks and dwarves and wizards traveling with him. So I've got a little bit of everything going on, whereas my daughters generally stay away from the companions and we're all about the spells, So it's kind of neat to see the characters develop, and it's sort of like get that RPG feel that you're building the character you want to have. Did you feel that, Ray?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, because especially you get those companions that help you draw cards. It's like, well, I'm definitely getting all the companions that I can.
Right.
Or a lot of the cards, like you said, they call back to other ones. Like one of my favorite cards is the Mountain King, like Thorin up on his throne. But to take best advantage of him, you have to have gotten gold so that you can go and buy a crown from the on board market, or the wizard who gives you extra points for having the spell tomes, which are worth a bunch of points but are dead weight in your deck. There's lots of ways to sort of customize your deck and give it a feel all of your own that's going to be totally distinct from everybody else's.
And so I think that's one of the things about Clank that I think makes it work is it's definitely a deck building game. And if you're a deck building game player, you're going to recognize a lot of the classic things in deck building games in here. But I think what makes this game really work is because it's also a very clearly a board game and you're working about moving through this dungeon. I think it adds a dimension that I really, really like a lot to it. And I'm pretty neutral with deck building games. There's some that I like. There's some that I don't like. I've never really been a big fan of Dominion. I like more bling in my games than just cards. This one really works because it's got a deck building mechanic, but I feel like it really complements this idea of exploring a dungeon on a board really, really nicely for me.
Yeah, it's not as abstract as a lot of deck building games are, because you're using your stuff to concrete, go into this dungeon, steal the treasure, and hopefully get out alive.
That's a great way to say it. It does feel more visceral than that, which is good. So after you've laid out your cards and you've activated all your cards and you've maximized what you can do with all the icons on your card, your turn ends, and then you've got to repopulate the card market there, the dungeon row, right? Because you may have bought some of the cards out of the row. The row's always supposed to have 6 cards in it. Maybe it's down to 2, to 5 cards or 4 cards. So you got to draw more from the deck and put them back into that row.
Yep. Worth noting that unlike some other games with the card row mechanism, like that start with Ascension, you do not refill the row as soon as you buy a card.
That's right.
You only refill it at the end of the turn.
That's exactly right. So you buy as many as you want. And what's interesting about this, you can buy in any order. You can move one, buy some, move a little more. I mean, you can do all these. You can combine your resources into any kind of creative way you need to do as much as you want to do in your turn, which is pretty neat. And I never really found, I was a little worried when I first read that rule that it would be sort of cumbersome trying to track all your, how many swords I pulled out and how many feet I had, but it really isn't. It's such a simple, set of things you can do that I never found it to be fumbling around trying to remember, did I have 4 swords or 3 or anything like that? It wasn't really hard. But after you've gone ahead and as Ray mentioned, you finish your turn, you're going to replenish that row, but here's where you got to watch, because when you replenish that row, not only are you excited to see what new cards are available, and the next player is excited because he's going to see some new stuff, but also there's going to be icons on some of these cards. It looks like the dragon icon, the dragon meeple sort of flaming, and that means the dragon attacks. So if any cards come into the row with that icon on them, the dragon does 1 attack. And remember, it's only 1 attack. So if you draw 2 cards and both of them the icon, it's still only 1 dragon attack. So the dragon queen, who happens to be a queen, by the way, Nikki, I believe Ray is her name, right?
That's correct. Yes.
So Nikki's going to attack, and a little tongue in cheek.
Doesn't sound too scary.
Well, Craig, do you want to read it's very dark. You want to read this?
Nick Detraxian.
Yeah, exactly. So Nikki's going to attack here. What you're going to do when Nikki attacks is we're going to look at where Nikki is in the Dragon Rage row. And that's going to tell us, first we're going to take all the cubes that are currently in that little Clank area, we're going to put them in the bag. So now the Dragon bag is full of some cubes. It starts the game with just black Dragon cubes in it, but as we mentioned earlier, different things you can do will cause Clank, which put more of your cubes in the bag. So we're going to look at where Nikki is on the Rage track. There's going to be some number of cube icons on there. That's how many cubes we're going to draw out of the Dragon bag. So we draw those cubes out, and you're hoping to see not your color come out. And if your color comes out, each one of the color cubes that are yours comes out. Each player has a little row of sort of basically health on the bottom of the board. And the health is a bunch of boxes that are exactly, funnily enough, cube-sized. So you're going to put the cubes you draw out in a player's color into their row. And that's basically how many wounds you've taken. So if I am blue, and a blue cube comes out, I'm going to put it in the blue row. And if Ray was red, his red cube comes out and his goes in the red row. And we're all watching to make sure no one's going to die, right? Pretty simple. Now, there are events in the game that can allow you to heal. There are spaces on the board with heart icons on them. There are healing potions you might find. And when you get those, you've got to take one of the cubes off your track and put it back into your general area. But those are not as common as you'd like to think. And when you take wounds, they generally stick around for a long time. So you really don't want to see your cubes come out of the bag. How did you find this mechanic, Ray? What did you think of the whole drawing cubes out of the bag when the dragon attacks thing?
This is great. It's kind of is the main motivator of the game, but it just works so well that, you're taking actions, and then there's so many great cards that say, but it adds some Clank, but it's, what? All right, I'll take it out. Or there's some monsters that you can kill, and you kill them, they add Clank. It'll be all right. I'll add the Clank. And because it's not so bad. The cubes just go over there. It's no problem. But then they get picked up and put in the bag, and all the choices that you made. This is a bag of your decisions and actions that is coming back to haunt you. And you reach in and you pull them out, and it's like, oh no, not my cube, not my cube, not my cube. And then, oh, why'd you draw my cube? And it's not me, it's the dragon. The dragon's attacking. You shouldn't have made so much noise.
Right.
Oh, it just works so well. And it's such a great mechanic that that really makes the game exciting.
And it does add, we talk about sometimes in board games a stand-up die roll where you're just like really watching for that one roll. And as people start to get wounded and you start getting near the point where if one more of your cubes comes out, you will die. You get to that tension where you're pulling out of the bag and the whole table's just watching and gasping. And every game I've played has that moment, and it really is a great mechanic. And the reason it works so well is because there's another big thing we should talk about. And that is the game board is divided into three main sections. There's sort of the there's the very top, which is sort of the entrance to the castle, getting in and out. Then there's the above ground part of the castle. So you're in the castle, but you're above what they call the deeps. And then there's the bottom part, sort of the below the ground part of the dungeon, which is the deeps. Where you die, should you die, matters. So if you die in the deeps, the deepest part of the dungeon, or you die without carrying an artifact, you're dead and you get 0 points. But as soon as any player dies, their meeple goes to the very top, this little track at the top of the board, which is sort of the death clock sort of starts. The end game timer starts. And every time it's your turn again, and if you're no longer either in the dungeon because you escaped, or if you're no longer in the dungeon because you died, you now move your meeple one more down this track, and as it gets farther down that track, you get free dragon attacks that do bonus cube draws. And by the fifth round, the dragon kills everybody who is still in the dungeon. So as soon as any player is either escapes the dungeon or is knocked out because of death, there's basically a 5-turn timer and the game ends, essentially. So that immediately puts a timer on the game. What's interesting about that is that timer can come because someone dies, but it also can come because someone escaped the dungeon. So either of those cases happen, you've just put an end game on the game, and it starts getting the tension really, really high, which is really interesting. The other part we should say is where you die in the dungeon also matters. So if you die in the depths, as I mentioned, even if you have an artifact, you get 0 score. If you die above the depths, but still inside the castle, and you have an artifact, the villagers come rescue you because they know you at least have some money on you, and you cannot collect any more points in the game, but you still count as having the points you had when you died. So if you die carrying a 7-point artifact and a few cards with victory points on them, and let's see if you die with like 20 victory points, you keep those 20 victory points to the end of the game, and that might be enough for you to still win. So you can die and still win, but you got to die above the depths, and you got to die with an artifact in your hands. The best scenario is you get out of the castle with your artifact, because not only do you get to keep all your points, but you get an additional token for plus 20 points for having escaped the castle with an artifact. So the ideal situation is you get out, and you get out way ahead of the rest of your thief friends so that they now have a timer on them to get the heck out, and maybe if you're lucky, they die in the depths because you got out quicker than they did, right? So this adds a really interesting press your luck sort of overall game pressure element, where if you can get in there, get this thing and get out, you put a bunch of pressure on all the rest of the players to figure out how they're going to get their artifact and get back out in time, since you were so sneaky and got in and out quick.
Yeah, I got to say, maybe this might be better for the final thoughts, but I think my ideal situation is not to be the first out way ahead, but to be the last, barely made it out before getting killed, so I can collect as much loot as possible while the other people are sitting on the surface.
Yeah, I think I like to be in the middle of the pack somewhere and have options. And one of the things that's really, when you play multiple plays, what makes this game really fascinating is that other market, that there's literally a little room sort of in the depths, but sort of near the middle of the dungeon there, that is this little marketplace where you can buy these known items you can buy for known amounts of gold. And one of them is a key. Now, the thing that makes the key cool is that I mentioned earlier, some of those trails you can't go through unless you have a key. Most of those key lock trails are strategically placed to make exiting the dungeon easier. So and to make it a shorter path out than it was in. So if you spend the time to get to that market and find the way to get the gold to buy that key, your exit can be much faster than someone who did not do that. There are also, as Ryan mentioned, there's a crown that gives you a bunch of bonus points. There is
Ryan did not mention
Ray.
anything.
Sorry, Ray. As Ray mentioned, there is a crown that gives you bonus points, but there's also the backpack, which lets you carry 2 artifacts, which really can give you some crazy points. But again, you got to make it to that market. You got to have the gold. You got to buy the backpack. So there's some really tough decision making and if you're doing all that, you're certainly not going to be the fastest guy out, who's probably just grabbing an artifact and going. So you're really, the player interaction in this game is really, really high, because not only are you fighting over the right cards you want to add to your own personal deck, but you're also got to watch to see if other players are going for the quick points. Is someone going deeper, and now they've got so many points that you can't catch them, so now you really want them to die, so you got to get out quick or make them cause some noise or something. So there's a lot going on there. Is that all making sense, Craig? You following all that craziness?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's pretty much it. Those are the main core mechanics of the game. Ray, did I miss anything core to the game at all there or anything?
No, I think you hit pretty much everything really well.
I think before we get to final thoughts, we should probably say one of the big parts of the flavor of the game is sort of these cool, interesting little rooms in the dungeon, but also the great cards. Ray, you want to give some examples of some of your favorite cards you saw in the game, or some of your favorite spaces on the board?
Yeah, let's see, the one card that has to be the most fun is one of the things that I actually appreciate the game is that in the cards themselves, there's not a lot of take that to like really go after somebody, but there is one card, or maybe 2 copies of it, called Tattle, which gives you a couple of skill for buying stuff with. But then also when you play that card, each of the other players has to add a Clank into the Clank spot.
Right.
So basically, ratting them out to the dragon and getting the dragon mad at them so that they'll get knocked out easier.
I love it.
And then just a lot of let's see, what was the one card that I'm trying to think of right now? There's a lot of great cards that I talked about the Mountain King earlier, who can just give you like a ton of movement and combat and skill. If you can power him up by getting the crown, and the art on that is just great. And I love, like, basically feel like I have Thorin with me along on my on my adventure. There's the Monkey Bot 3000 that you talked about. It was a lot of fun. The one card is Brilliance, which just has a very suave looking guy for the art, and it's just draw 3 cards, and it's just awesome. Like, you get to basically build out your hand by 3 times, by 3 extra cards with this Brilliance card. There's just so many great cards in the game.
It is great, and I think one of the things that really works too, and it combined with the board, is that this notion of the optimal paths on the board. If you build a deck that's all about movement speed but very light in combat, paths in the dungeon will be bad for you, because there are some paths that are full of monsters, little monster icons. So and that might be a quicker and faster path, but it causes more damage to you unless you have swords, right? And so this is what also makes the replayability high with a double-sided board, because eventually with enough plays, you're going to develop certain strategies and tactics and deck builds that are optimal for this path or that path. Then if you flip the board over, those paths are all gone. It's a whole different way to get around the dungeon. So I really like that combination of the board and there's strategic options based on what the rooms you're in and the paths you go down and where certain things fall on the board versus how you build your deck. There's a lot of depth there, and it adds that level of variety between not just a deck builder, but also the board game component and the variety in the board as well. So I think it really feels like it works on all levels for me.
Mm-hmm.
So on that note, let's get into final thoughts. So Craig.
Yeah.
In the style of an enraged dragon who
no,
just had her treasure.
Not with Ray here.
Oh, should we have Ray do it? All right, Ray.
That's like insulting. The man is a professional. You gave me my little breadcrumb. I took it.
Fair. So Ray.
I told you I'm not good at improv, right?
Ray, here we go. So Ray,
Let's go.
In the style of an enraged dragon who just realized her treasure was stolen, please describe the patent-pending D6G rating system.
I also don't have the echo effect. All right.
Yeah, that's a cheap crutch, man. You shouldn't need it.
These adventurers coming into my dungeon, stealing my treasures. But some of them are better than others. How? How will I rate which of these adventurers are actually the better ones and which are the worst ones? Perhaps if I were to roll a die that would come up as a 1 through 6, and I could rate the better ones as having a higher probability of being better by saying that they have a lower number of the die. So a 2+ on the die would mean that there would be a 5 out of 6 chance of it being a good adventure, while a 6+ adventure would be my lunch. Yes, that is it.
Nicely done, Ray. Very good.
Extremely well done. I like the addition of the lunch, although now I'm hungry.
I like the lunch. It was very, very good. So yes, the probability you will like this game on the roll of a D6. So, Ray, why don't you kick us off here? What are your final thoughts? What do you like? What are your concerns about Clank?
All right. Well, I really do enjoy this game quite a bit, even though I have a 50% rate of being eaten by the dragon thus far.
Yeah.
It's the one thing that I got to come out right and say that I really like about it is that it is accessible across like a whole range of gamers. I've played it with my my 2 boys, my 10-year-old and 8-year-old, and my aunt, who enjoys games but is not a gamer. And they all had fun with the game. And my 10-year-old actually, won both times we played the 4 players. I played 2 players with my son. That was still fun with my 8-year-old, and I managed to barely beat him on that one. And then I played and went with some of my other more gamer friends, and we all had fun with it too. It really is a game that you can play with a really wide range of people, and just the way that it works, everyone seems to enjoy it. One thing that I wanted to note about it that is sort of curious choice that they made for a deck building game is a lot of deck building games is part of the strategy is getting the bad cards out of your deck. But this game has very limited ways of removing cards from your deck, from culling your deck. So you'll end up with a lot of those starting cards in your hand most of the time because there's only a few cards that get them out of there. And, the game doesn't suffer for anything, but it's just an interesting, I think, design choice that they made to not really let you take those cards out. So even towards the end of your game and you've built up your deck with all these great cards, you're still stumbling every now and then and just throwing a Clank in on on the card that does nothing else. I really like, we talked about the Clank mechanism where you're adding those cubes in and how it's, in the push your luck aspect of it. And I'll tell you, when I first heard about this game, and learned the rules and man, you get out and the dragon just starts attacking and wiping people out. The first thing that I did in the game was I went, pretty much tried to do this straight shot in. I think that the 20-point artifact was not too inaccessible for me. Took some hits from monsters while I was getting it, and I got out as fast as I could. And I did not win the game. I mean, I was there doing dragon attacks every turn, but everybody else that hung around in there and hung with the dragon, and then my 10-year-old son who managed to sneak out on the last turn before I knocked everybody out, he won the game just by a mile. And I was so happy to see that it wasn't just going to be a race to who could get in and out the fastest. You really can, stay in there, hang with the dragon as long as you didn't make too much clank along the way, and score the points that you need to win the game. I mean, even if you don't get out. In the second game I played, my son, 10-year-old son, he didn't make it out, but he still won the game because he, got taken out in the higher part of the castle and had gotten enough other stuff to be able to score those points. And there's just a lot of great ways to get points with the cards you can buy in the castle row give you points. You can collect stuff. The gold that you get along the way gets you points. So even if you're making a fight heavy deck, you can still try to accumulate gold to get you some more points along the way. And then the tomes that give you a bunch of points but are basically dead weight in your deck. There's a lot of great options in there, a lot of ways that you can build your deck to act the way you want it to and to score the points. And then just the tension at the end of trying to get out of the dungeon. It's like, all right, 2 more steps and I'm out of the depths.
Right.
And you just get your hand and then there's no boots. There's no boots. Why do I have no boots? I got all these movement cards and there's no boots. And then the dragon comes and
you die
takes you out. And it's just so much fun. And the way the game builds, it's got a great arc because there's the dragon, only a few cubes to start and then a few more, but you don't have very many cubes in. But then as you get more and more of those dragon cubes that come out, more and more damage going on. And every turn is just increasing the tension. There's going to be more attacks, more player cubes coming out. Is it going to be your cube? No, I didn't put any cubes last in. How did I get 3 cubes out this time? And now I can't go out by those monsters anymore. I have to try to go a different way. There's just so much that works so well about this game. I really love it.
What would you give it for a rating, Ray?
I am going to give it a good solid 3+.
Oh, that's a nice rating.
Because I know that there are people who, just don't like deck building games. And this is a deck building game, even though I think a lot of those people don't like the heavy abstraction that a lot of deck building games have. And I think the board aspect of it will sort of take care of some of that. Oh, and by the way, I love the opposite side of the board. The fact that they put that in is great. It just really boosts the replay value. Yeah. But I think a good 3+. I mean, there are going to be people who are going to get annoyed when they buy stuff from the row because this is a row game where you flip out more cards. And this happened in my last game. And I'm not griping or upset or bitter or anything that the fact that 2 turns in a row I had okay choices and then flipped out awesome cards that I could have bought on my turn if they come out the turn before. But of course, they didn't come out on my turn. They came out on the next guy's turn. So he bought them and he had the magic carpet and I didn't. And I died and he got out on his magic carpet. I'm not bitter or upset at all or any. No. What was I talking about? Oh, yeah, no, it's a great game. 3+. I think a lot of people really like it.
Great. Well, Ray, you had all the points. It's really hard for me to find any faults in this one. I like this game a lot. And one of my favorite things about the game is you mentioned, Ray, is the accessibility. So, I like finding great games that I can play with my gamer friends, but I also like finding great games that my family enjoys, and particularly my wife. So my daughters are pretty heavy gamers, so they'll try anything pretty much. But my wife's a little more, she games, but she's much more conservative, much more casual gamer. And what I liked about this was we learned the rules. I taught it to them. And it was literally like 5 minutes in, and it was no longer, how does this work? We were just playing, and, about 20 minutes in, it was all about the strategy. And, oh, I can't believe you did that to me, and, oh, I'm going to do this to you. And there was, I love games like that where, very shortly into the game, no one's thinking about, the mechanics melt away, and you're just playing the game, interacting with each other, and figuring out how to win and not worrying about how to do step X on a 15-step, turn order sequence. And so I really like that about it. I love the theme. And again, my only negative thing is where you kind of pointed out too, is I do have a lot of friends who do not care for deck building games. And I almost don't like the fact that the front of the box says deck builder on it, because it is, but
makes your job harder to sell.
It is. Yes, exactly. So I would agree with you, Ray. I think this is a 3+er. I think this is a really great game. I almost want to give it a reroll. Because I think when you play this game, you're going to be ready for another round, and I think with a couple replays, it's right. It's going to clock in right around between an hour and a half, which is fast enough where I don't think I would say it's welcome in any way. So, Craig, what do you think? What do you think your desire to play the game? How would you rate your desire to play this game, having heard Ray and I prattle on about it for a while now?
interestingly enough, I would say it went down at the beginning because I was not aware that it was a deck builder of any sort. I knew very little about it other than you loved it. You talked about the theme a lot. You talked about how cool the innovative mechanics were and the clank and the consequences of your actions. So then I was like, oh, deck builder, I don't know. And then you guys talked some more about the theme and how cool the consequences were and building up your decisions and working against it. And I would say that my personal interest, to take a Rafe perspective, went from a 3+ to a 5+ down to a 4+ right now.
All right. Well, we'll take that. That's the middle of the road. I like it.
All right, middle of the road. But if you worked on me a little more, we're like, oh, but the theme's so cool, and look at the artwork, and you put some black tape over the part that said deck builder on the box.
See, there you go.
I'd probably go down to a 3+.
All right, excellent. Well, we'll try to get to the table here, Craig. So, Ray, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy recording schedule. I know you could be finishing off Craig's book right now if you hadn't joined us on the show. So,
you could be. I was torn, but I wanted you here instead.
I appreciate that. But, it's we've waited this long for Legacy of Shadow audiobook. We can wait just a few days more, hopefully. Right. I really, really appreciate you guys having me on. It's been something I've been looking forward to ever since you guys agreed to do it, and it's been a pleasure all around.
Well, thanks again. Now, Ray, if folks want to follow, what you're up to in gaming or in audio work or anything, where would they go on the internet to track you down?
Well, the best place is probably on Twitter at Ray Greenley VO. That's where I'm most active, although not as active on social media as I should be. But that's where if I'm working on something, I'll sometimes post about it. Like if you had been following me, you would have seen progress over the time here of Legacy of Shadow, as I've posted about working on that. I also do have a Facebook page, Ray Greenley Voiceover, that you can check there, and I do post occasionally there when some bigger news comes out. I have a website, raygreenleyvoiceover.com, which I don't update nearly as often as I should, but if you want to check that out, and I've got some of the information about some of the other books I've done there. You can also, I would encourage you to go to Audible, maybe after clicking on the Audible link on the D6G website. You can search for me in the search box and my name, Ray Greenley, Greenley, and you'll come up with the books that I've recorded. And if you would check those out and take a listen, I would be most grateful. And I'm also on Board Game Geek as RM Green. Is my handle there, and I'm posted about stuff every now and then. But the Twitter and Facebook are where I am most active at this point.
Excellent. Well, Ray, thanks again so much. It was really great to chat with you and finally have you on the show here. And really looking forward to hearing the final version of Legacy of Shadow there.
Yeah, thank you again, and looking forward to getting it out there and to getting some copies out to some of the listeners who should submit their entries through the Twitter, as we talked about earlier in the episode.
And I would like to just jump in and personally recommend several of Ray's titles. The Atomic Sea is a really cool story. I listened to that. And what was the Philip K. Dick? I talked about that a lot when I was listening to it. There are still some stories in that stick with me.
Yeah,
there's a lot of cool stuff.
I loved picking those stories out. There's this almost like listening to episodes of the Twilight Zone, and there's some really great stories in there, and I appreciate the mention. That was a lot of fun to record.
Awesome. Well, Ray, have a great one, and we'll hopefully see you in the not too distant future somewhere. We'll keep looking for you.
Yeah,
you're out there somewhere.
Yeah, look forward to it. Thank you very much, guys.
Take care.
This Did You Ever Notice is brought to you by all of our fine friends over at Patreon. The men, the women, the boys, the girls, the dogs, the cats, really all of the beings that help us do this show. Today I'd like to thank Vincent, Volker Jacobson, W. David McKenzie, and Wouter Perot, or Perot, or I'm probably thinking it's Pro. And that brings us to the end of the alphabet, which means I'm going to have to redo this list and add in all of the new Patreons. So thank you, new and old, for helping out the show. Did you ever notice how dangerous certainty can be? I have misremembered many things in my life, and I could almost believe that I have a really, really bad memory, except that I know from almost 50 years of experience now that I'm pretty average for most things. So I'm going to assume that many people have misremembered many things over the course of their lives. I have learned through relatively few but sort of painful experiences how dangerous it can be when you think you're 100% correct and it turns out that you're wrong after you've made some grand stand. So I try not to speak in certitude and in absolutes, because quite often you'll find that either your facts are wrong or someone else has an equally valid interpretation of what's going on. So that realization that I've been wrong on many occasions over the course of my life has had a secondary effect as well. Not only am I more aware of what I'm saying, I'm also more aware of what other people are saying. And I have a natural aversion now to people who are absolutely certain in the rectitude of their point of view. And in fact, the more certain you are, the more likely I am to look sort of askance. And that goes triply or quadruply in gaming when ultimately what we're discussing here is little men, whether they're plastic or women, whether they're plastic or metal or resin or whatever. But someone who feels that strongly about these games makes me a little nervous. Although I know just last episode I was talking about how emotional I was over Games Workshop and Warhammer 40,000. I know the difference. I don't know if you do. I don't know if there is a difference. I think there's a difference. I'm not certain. See what I did there? But all this came out just the other day when Russ and I were cleaning up after our latest Warhammer 40,000 game at a local friendly game store. And a gentleman came up to us and exclaimed how surprised he was to see Warhammer 40,000 or any Games Workshop game being played, because it doesn't get played at this particular store unless our small group of friends is playing it. And so I was, we used to play it a lot, and trying to talk it up, and we enjoyed it a lot, and Russ talked about how he enjoyed it a lot. And he, the only reason I'm going to mention both of these stores by name is that because both of them are now defunct. But, this guy was very, very intimidating, but very large gentleman, very, very tall, very nice and pleasant. But he said while we were packing up, you know who used to carry lots of Games Workshop stuff? Carried everything was the Wizards Tower. Now, the Wizards Tower was the first local game store that we were all playing at when we started our Necromunda game, our Necromunda campaign 20 some odd years ago. And so we're very familiar with it. And it was a nice store. The people who worked there were nice, and they had some good product. What they had was lots of backlog. They had every old model you could ever ask for in these disgustingly dusty boxes underneath the shelves where they had more of the modern stuff, modern back then. Let's let go the fact that they would let their role-playing gamers just move all our terrain all over the place and break our terrain that we made and left at the store for them to use and stuff like that. But anyway, so there's other negative memories there, but I remember very well the product depth that they had, and I would go there if I wanted something really old for a conversion or something like that. And then when Russ and John opened DACA, I also happen to know, because I was, I wasn't involved in the store, but I was very close to both of them as they were doing it, that they had a deal with Games Workshop where they had everything that Games Workshop sold at retail in their store. They got the full package. Games Workshop actually came up and worked with them on setting up the store, and then may or may not have stolen the idea of hobby bunkers from them, but we'll just leave that for another day of speculation. Because their store was such an awesome place to go and game, it was set up to be like Games Day every day was the tagline. So they had I had helped them build these really cool game tables, and there was amazing amounts of space, and 40 people could play at a time, and it was a really, really awesome sort of mecca for miniatures gamers. And they had everything that you could get from Games Workshop. So just this last week, the guy was like, "Oh, they had everything," and I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, no, I remember them. Oh, yeah, they were awesome. They had everything. They were fantastic. They were great." And and Russ just kind of like nods his head over there. He doesn't like getting involved in these sorts of conversations, and I just nodded my head and I said, "Yeah, well, you know who else had a lot of really cool stuff was Daka because I like to represent. Let's just stand up for my friends." And he went, "Oh, no, they didn't have anything." And I was like, no, I think they did. No. In fact, you know what? When Wizard's Tower opened, people went from Daka to Wizard's Tower to get stuff. And I was like, well, Wizard's Tower was open long before Daka. And in fact, Daka opened because of the way Wizard's Tower was being run and was treating the local gaming community. I didn't say that last part because I didn't want to be, this guy obviously had some emotional investment in the Wizard's Tower, and I didn't want to be confrontational. There was no need to be. There was nothing to be gained. But it was, no. No. I mean, I know Wizard's Tower was open before, but they still had lots more stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm pretty sure the Daka had a lot of stuff. No. And I was like, okay. So here's this guy, like absolutely certain that the store that he remembers was better than the store that either of the stores that I remember. And he was certain. He was absolutely certain. And now I'm sure, and that kind of made me itch a little bit because, certitude. But B, I'm sure that there was in some way in his head, there was a way that was true. For instance, if you're talking about, like I said, the old original little blister pack models that they had tons of in those dusty boxes under the shelves, I'm sure that he was right, that they had, because Daka didn't have any of that old stuff because it was brand new. So all they were getting was they had everything currently available and every new release as it came out every week, and all the support materials for every game that Games Workshop did. It was a Games Workshop store, but, c'est la vie, to each his own. And so I had a little laugh about it afterwards and didn't get upset, and nobody got upset, and everything's fine. But yeah, memory can be a funny thing. Anyway, that's all I've got to say about that. So thanks for listening, and good night.
Achievement unlocked! You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by either emailing us at info@the d6generation.com or by posting in our official D6G episode thread at the top of the Daka Discussions forum on dakadaka.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. See you in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening, and happy gaming.
The theme from Total Fangirl comes from the soundtrack of The Last Night on Earth, the zombie game, courtesy of Flying Frog Productions, and is a composition of Mary Beth Magalanes.
Hello.
What
happened there? I'm having
Russ just went through puberty. I think we should take a moment to celebrate.
Yes, there it is.
And break a glass or something.
I'm feeling so much older.